I was 17 years old, sitting in a third-year high school classroom at number 18 middle school, and the highest aspiration I had developed across my entire academic career was finding the next good web novel to binge read. A clean, modest goal. Achievable, low overhead, consistent return on investment, and personal satisfaction. I had built a comfortable life architecture around this goal. Grades that were average enough to avoid teacher scrutiny, a functional phone loaded with downloaded fiction, and a best friend named Jian Jigong who shared my philosophy and knew every internet cafe within cycling range. Gangi was short, wore thick glasses, had a small face housing an enormous quantity of schemes, and had been my partner in productive idleness since we were in middle school. We had an arrangement that worked perfectly, and I had every intention of maintaining it for another year until the college entrance examinations forced some kind of reckoning. Then a crazy old man in a fertilizer bag got hauled away by men in white coats. A translucent text box appeared in front of my face, and everything got considerably more interesting. The afternoon started completely normally. The school bell rang. The hallways filled with the particular chaos of teenage boys dispersing in multiple urgent directions, half of them sprinting for the cafeteria, and the other half heading for the restrooms to smoke cigarettes and perform the ritual of looking impressive. Ganyu was packing his bag beside me with that specific gleam behind his glasses, the look that meant he had planned the afternoon's gaming session down to the champion picks. He mentioned, with the casual air of someone presenting something valuable, that he had found a new website with updates from some teachers. The phrasing was code I decoded immediately. Internet cafe, games, content. I had been composing a principled refusal on grounds of study obligations. I abandoned this completely. Gangi's scheme was already in motion, and I was already standing up. Except we never arrived. The school gate area was jammed solid, vehicles blocking the intersection, students pressed in a dense mass, several teachers attempting to disperse people with the limited authority of adults who technically cannot compel teenagers to do anything they do not want to do. Gangi bounced at the edges of the crowd, infuriated by his height, unable to see past anyone. I leaned slightly, because at 182 centimeters I had enough natural elevation to see without effort. What I saw was a disheveled little old man wrapped in what appeared to be a large fertilizer bag, pinned to the ground by uniformed officers and men in white coats. The old man was not accepting this arrangement gracefully. He was kicking, struggling with his head held up, and shouting with real energy about being the county magistrate of Yongzhou, personally appointed by His Majesty the Emperor, and demanding in the most commanding voice he could manage that these audacious, unruly, treasonous citizens release him immediately. He was genuinely furious. He also appeared to have lost track of approximately what century he was in. One of the officers told him the Qing dynasty had been finished for over 100 years, slapped the back of his head with visible impatience, and then all of them together carried the old man into a waiting vehicle like a piece of particularly stubborn cargo. The police car and the mental health van drove away with their sirens going, and the crowd began dispersing, students chattering about what they had witnessed. Gangi had heard the old man's name. No, my name. The same characters, the same pronunciation, everything. He pointed at me while the realization landed, the gesture of someone sharing a joke with someone who has just become the subject of it. He started laughing with the whole body commitment of someone who has found the funniest possible joke, folded practically in half, grabbed his own knees, glasses threatening to slide off. I stood there with my expression entirely blank, not because I failed to understand the humor, but because a translucent virtual text box had appeared in the air directly in front of my face, and I was reading it. The text box was fully opaque to me and apparently invisible to everyone else, because no one in the dispersing crowd reacted to anything except the spectacle of the old man being loaded into the vehicles. Gangi continued laughing, unaware. I stood very still and read. The system had arrived to deliver a life history, not mine, someone else's. A county magistrate from the Great Gan dynasty who happened to share my name and had lived a life of extraordinary difficulty. The text laid it out in organized panels. At age 8, sent to the Daegum Yun's Academy from a poor family, bullied for years by wealthier peers. At age 18, began the provincial examinations and failed 9 consecutive times across 9 years. Mocked by everyone around him, his childhood betrothal broken by the concubine's daughter of the Chu family who had grown tired of waiting for a poor scholar who never passed anything. In grief and indignation, the magistrate had sworn the classic vow. 30 years east of the river, 30 years west of the river, a poor youth should not be underestimated. At age 28, finally passed and became a Shengyuan scholar, but that same night both his parents were murdered by the bandit known as the soul-severing life-taking blade. Devastated, the magistrate joined a martial escort convoy to pursue revenge while also continuing his literary studies. He trained intensely, ruined his body through excessive practice, but in that ruin somehow unlocked the long-lost evil-slaying sword technique. With his power restored, he killed the bandit and returned to examinations, passing to become a jurin. At age 37, passed the spring examinations to become a gongshi, and his wife became pregnant. At age 38, passed the palace examination, was appointed county magistrate of Yunzhou. His wife gave birth to twins, his family complete at last despite his physical limitations. And then, on the road to take up his post ambushed by the soul-chasing life-taking sword, a close friend of the bandit he had killed, His martial arts were completely destroyed. He was thrown off a cliff and landed somehow in a parallel world called Blue Star. I read the whole thing. What a genuinely terrible life. I felt something briefly that might have been empathy or might have been literary appreciation for a well-constructed backstory. Then I noticed the two buttons at the bottom of the text box. One said yes, one said no. The system was asking whether I was willing to learn the advanced knowledge and technology of Blue Star in order to return to Dagon and change my fate. I pressed yes before I had finished processing what I was reading. I did not deliberate. I did not examine both options. I pressed yes with the complete conviction of someone who had read several thousand web novels and recognized exactly what was happening. The system had delivered itself to my door. The old magistrate it was looking for had been hauled away, but the system had apparently decided that another person with the same name was close enough, and I was not going to correct this. The system was mine. What was a system? It was the gold finger for a protagonist to become extraordinary, the defining instrument of every novel hero's journey from nothing to legendary. I was a 17-year-old kid from an ordinary family with grades that would eventually produce an ordinary job and an ordinary life, and I had just been handed the most structurally significant plot element in the entire history of Chinese web fiction. Refusing it would have been a betrayal of everything I had spent years learning from reading. I pressed yes with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for this their whole life without knowing it. The system had delivered itself to my door. The old geezer it was looking for had been hauled away, but the system had apparently decided that finding another person with the same name was close enough, and it was now mine. Refusing would have been an insult to every protagonist who had ever come before me in fiction. A system was the singular defining instrument of every web novel hero's journey, the mechanism by which ordinary, unremarkable people became extraordinary, accumulated impossible resources, acquired devastating abilities, ascended through power levels that left everyone around them astonished. I was a 17-year-old with mediocre grades and an ordinary future. With a system, the whole architecture of that future was suddenly negotiable. The text box updated immediately. The old geezer's transmigration counterattack system had bound successfully, and the displayed host profile described a middle-aged man with a broken body and crippled martial arts, who had arrived in a modern world with nothing. The system was confused about who it had found. This was acceptable to me. What I needed was the first mission: obtain a Blue Star identity and household registration, reward a muscle and bone shaping pill. I turned back to Gengi, who was still laughing, and told him something had come up and I needed to head home. He started arguing about the internet cafe and the new website. I was already walking. Behind me, I heard Jin Gon, our homeroom teacher, asking Gengi in a measured voice what website had been mentioned, and I felt a brief guilt that I converted efficiently into forward motion. The mission was not going to wait for me to feel bad. I ran the whole way home, opened the door loudly enough to startle my mother Jang Seolwa out of the kitchen brandishing a spatula, waved vaguely in her direction, and shut myself in my bedroom. I yanked my ID card out of the nightstand drawer and held it up. The mission status updated to completed. For a genuine transmigrator, a person who had materialized in a modern city with no documents, no registered address, no verifiable existence in any government database, obtaining a legal identity would have been a genuine ordeal involving considerable creativity and risk. For me, it was reaching into a drawer. The muscle and bone shaping pill appeared in my pants pocket with a small familiar weight, pitch black and round, looking like a chocolate candy. I read the description: generates muscle and bone, reshapes meridians, enhances physical constitution, repairs severe injuries, improves the ordinary person's baseline. The description was written for a man whose body had been devastated by decades of hard martial arts training, by a cliff, by the accumulated damage of someone who had started with poor health and added extreme physical stress to it for 30 years. For that person, the pill was a restoration. For me, it was a pure upgrade from a reasonable starting point. I ran the math briefly. A 17-year-old who already had normal functioning meridians and a body without major damage was going to receive all the improvement without the baseline suffering that the pill was calibrated for. This was not an unfair conclusion. I swallowed it before I finished reading the second sentence. I had been paying attention to novels long enough to know that hesitating over system rewards was how protagonists wasted chapters. The pill was clearly a gift. The only question was how good a gift it would turn out to be. It tasted like a traditional medicine preparation, slightly bitter with sweetness following. I drank a large glass of water and waited for whatever was supposed to happen. No transformation sequence. No dramatic internal heat. No rivers of sweat. Nothing in the novels had prepared me for a pill that simply worked without spectacle. I walked back to my room slightly disappointed, pulled up my shirt, and had to sit down for a moment. Six-pack abdominal muscles. Defined, clear, the kind that people spend years and money developing. I rolled up my sleeve and flexed. Veins appeared along my arm. I punched at the air several times, and the air accommodated my fist with no resistance worth mentioning. One small black pill. One result. Immediate. The system had produced something extraordinary in the first 5 minutes of operation. My mother called me for dinner. I tucked my shirt in and went to help bring food to the table. At dinner, I said nice things about the cooking, which was not flattery but accurate assessment, because my mother was genuinely a good cook and I had always known this and had not always said so. And the fruit of wisdom had apparently also given me better judgment about which truths were worth expressing. My father watched me with the careful attention of a man who has noticed something has changed, but is still cataloging what the change actually is. My mother smiled and gave me more food. I ate and thought about the system's pattern so far. 2 missions, 2 rewards. Both rewards targeted the body and mind simultaneously. Physical enhancement, then intellectual enhancement. The system was building a platform for everything else. The old magistrate's body had been broken by decades of hard living and then completely destroyed on the cliff. The system was rebuilding him from the ground up. Since the body it was rebuilding was mine instead, I was getting a significant upgrade from a reasonable baseline rather than a recovery from severe damage. The distinction was important. The second mission appeared at dinner. Learn a Blue Star script and read it proficiently. Reward a fruit of wisdom. I thought about this for a moment. For the original host, learning to read in a new world would have been a genuine long-term project. The man had been thrown off a cliff with whatever knowledge he had from the Great Gon Dynasty, and Blue Star's writing system would have been entirely foreign. For me, I had been reading for as long as I could remember, and my phone had a downloaded novel I had been in the middle of before the system appeared. After I ate, I went to my room, opened the web novel on my phone, and read 20 chapters without looking up. The mission status changed to completed. The fruit materialized in my pocket with enough weight to drag the whole side of my school uniform sideways, and I struggled it out. Large, pear-shaped. I bit into it and my face scrunched involuntarily from the sourness. I continued anyway. I ate every bit, including the core, chewing the stem until it offered nothing before discarding it, because a permanent intelligence enhancement and 3 days of photographic memory was worth any discomfort, and treating the reward carelessly would have been genuinely stupid. I dragged my English-Chinese dictionary off the desk shelf and started reading from page 1. The photographic memory was immediate and total. Every entry locked in place on the first reading, precise and retrievable. I worked through the dictionary, then textbooks, then poetry collections, then the art of war, then classical essays, then anything else I could reach. 2.5 hours of sleep at the end of the night, and I woke up completely rested. I had grown 3 centimeters overnight, 185 centimeters. The school uniform that had always been baggy now fit correctly. I stood at the bedroom door frame, measuring against the marks I had made there over the years, and processed this for a quiet moment, because growing 3 centimeters in 8 hours while asleep was the muscle and bone shaping pill doing something that physics did not ordinarily permit, and I appreciated it. My father in Guionse drove me to school. He had a habit of singing along to the radio in the mornings, which he only did when he was in a good mood, and this morning he was in a good mood. He looked at my tote bag in the absence of the school bag with the expression of a man exercising restraint. I said I had left the bag at home because I had already memorized the textbooks and did not need them. He looked at me over the top of his glasses while stopped at a traffic light with the expression of a man deciding whether to pursue this. He decided not to. I said to drive safely and walked through the gate with my hands behind my back, leaving him in the car with whatever he was thinking. Chu Gyogyo was approaching from the street vendor area. She was my desk mate and the acknowledged beauty of our class, fair-skinned with large eyes and naturally curly hair in a ponytail, wearing the same school uniform as everyone else but somehow making it appear as though it had been designed specifically for her. She fell into step beside me and looked at me for a few seconds and then stopped. She noted that I seemed considerably taller than the previous day. She asked whether I was wearing height-increasing insoles. I said I was not. She said she did not believe me and demanded I take off my shoes as proof. I pointed out that removing shoes in a public area was both impractical and a potential health risk for bystanders. We went through the gate still debating the evidence, and my father, who had parked along the roadside to observe, made a sound that suggested he had formed his own conclusions and drove away. In the classroom, Gangi launched himself at me with considerable energy. He explained in detail what had happened after I left. The homeroom teacher had caught him mid-announcement about the new website, called his parents, delivered a thorough character assessment, and Gangi had spent his evening receiving what he described as a dual-wielded educational experience. His allowance was suspended. His back end was still reporting discomfort. I asked with genuine curiosity why he had simply told the truth rather than inventing an explanation. The expression on his face as he processed this question was the expression of a person who has just seen a door they did not know existed. He sat down slowly. I pulled The Art of War out of my tote bag. He leaned over, looked at the cover, asked why I was reading military strategy. I said those who study strategy have sharp minds and that all warfare was based on deception. Then I pushed his head back and told him his hair looked greasy. He immediately grabbed his hair, confirmed it was not, realized he had been tricked again, and delivered the expression of someone experiencing the accumulation of a pattern. Teacher Hu Guibun arrived with her test papers. She was a known quantity at number 18 middle school, respected and somewhat feared. Someone who had memorized an entire English-Chinese dictionary in preparation for her own examinations and ran her classroom with the assumption that dedication was the only acceptable approach. The student I had been before the Fruit of Wisdom had used her classes to read novels on a small phone and had been scoring in the 20s and 30s, entirely through probabilistic guessing on multiple choice. and copying content from the reading sections for the essay portion. She distributed the papers and began her patrol. I picked up my pen and worked through the paper. Multiple choice, all correct from memory. Fill in the blanks, same. Reading comprehension, full marks. When I reached the essay section and wanted clarification on a formatting point, I raised my hand and asked the teacher to explain it. The classroom went entirely silent. Gangi's eyes appeared to separate slightly from his face. Chu Gyogyo's hand froze mid-sentence and stayed there. Teacher Hu Guibun processed the request in measured voice. This was an exam. I said in that case I would simply hand in what I had without the essay. She made a sound that was not technically a word and came to look at my paper. She checked the multiple choice, the fill in the blanks, the reading comprehension. When she reached the essay section and stood still for a moment, she carried my paper to the front of the room and began explaining the essay format to me in precise and generous detail. Right there during the exam, while 30-some classmates watched. The instruction continued for several minutes. When she finished, I thanked her and said her explanation had been excellent. The corner of her mouth lifted against her intention. She told me to come to her anytime I had questions, and returned to patrolling with slightly elevated posture. The mission confirmed in my mind. Visit a famous teacher and obtain earnest guidance. Complete. The Great Vajra Palm awarded. A Southern Shaolin secret technique cultivating both internal and external force. I would need to be thoughtful about routine physical activities going forward. During the break period after exams, Gangi and I went to the second-floor restroom. Zhangjae, Gabi, and 5 others in open school uniforms with cigarettes appeared in the doorway and occupied the entrance. The other students in the restroom finished their business with notable efficiency. Students arriving saw the configuration and found other options. Gangi identified 2 of them, members of the Jatian Gang, a group of village-connected young men who had organized themselves under a leader called Dagu. Dagu was reportedly a capable fighter with some family standing, which made the teachers treat the group with more caution than the objective situation might warrant. The gang had decided that my arrival at the school gate that morning beside Chu Gyogyo required a response. I told Gangi to take my phone and record everything from the back. He took it with hands already trembling, found a position behind a stall partition, and crouched down. I walked toward the 7 of them and asked pleasantly whether they were looking for me. The encounter was brief. Phoenix Spread's wings sent 2 of them into the facilities before they completed a step. Bodhidharma brushing sleeves added 2 more. 8 steps to chase the cicada kept me ahead of anyone trying to flank. I want to be precise about what this felt like from the inside, because from the outside it probably looked dramatic in a way that made Gangi's hand shake while he was filming it. From the inside it felt like moving through water that had not yet decided to resist. The techniques were not things I performed so much as things that arrived ahead of my intention. The footwork pattern of 8 steps to chase the cicada had the quality of a dance that leads the dancer rather than being led, each step arriving under my foot with the inevitability of a response to gravity, and the Great Vajra Palm's controlled force meant each contact was precise enough to resolve the situation without damage I would need to explain later. The muscle and bone shaping pill had reorganized my body into something with reaction speed that was no longer exactly ordinary, and the combination of that with the techniques produced an experience of fighting 7 people that felt, from where I stood, like having a slightly complicated conversation. The whole exchange lasted approximately as long as it takes to read a short sentence aloud. Zhang Jie and Gabi were the only 2 left standing. I took each by the collar and asked who had sent them. They told me, with the sincerity of men currently being held at an awkward angle, that Dagu had seen me at the gate with Chu Gyogyo and found this unacceptable. I sent a message through them for Dagu. Future provocation would result in consequences I described without ambiguity. They agreed immediately and completely. The mission completed. Getting along with peers. Reward a 1 cubic meter storage space. I considered the system's working definition of peer relations for a moment, decided not to dispute it, and turned my attention to the storage space with genuine excitement. 1 cubic meter of personal space accessible by thought alone. I moved my phone in, felt the weight leave my pocket, retrieved it. Seamless, silent, instantaneous. The practical applications were significant, and I would catalog them properly later, but even the immediate obvious uses were already valuable. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Chu Gyogyo pushed through immediately when she saw me, checked me for injuries, found none, shifted from concern to relief. Liang Huanhuan and Zhou Mengyul were right behind her, wanting details. I looked at Gangi and said he should probably wash his hands because I thought something might have gotten on them during the confusion. He asked what had gotten on them. I said I might be misremembering. He insisted loudly and with escalating distress that absolutely nothing had gotten on his hands, while Chu Gyogyo and her friends laughed hard enough that Liang Huanhuan had to hold the wall. I said I was probably wrong and that we should get back to class, and walked away with Chu Gyogyo catching up beside me. Gangi's footsteps behind us were accompanied by muffled grievances about the concept of brotherhood. Back in class, teacher Jin Gon announced the streaming exam, sprint class for the top 50 in the school, parallel class for ranks 50 to 100, basic class below that. While he explained the purpose and structure, Chu Gyogyo slid a small note across the desk with 4 words telling me to do my best. I picked up my pen with my left hand and wrote back that I would be waiting for her in the sprint class. She read it and her eyes went wide. She whispered that she did not believe it. I said I never lied about bets and asked whether she wanted to put something on it. We negotiated quietly while Jin Gon talked about important things. If I made it into the sprint class, she would buy my breakfast every morning until the college entrance exams. If I did not, I would walk her home every evening after school. She extended her pinky with the total confidence of someone who had looked at the historical record and found no reason for doubt. I wrapped my pinky around hers and we pressed our thumbs together to seal it. The afternoon light fell across our joined hands for a moment, and Chu Gyogyo turned to look at the front of the room with her ears slightly pink. The lunch break brought a larger confrontation. Dagu had gathered 20-some people in the small garden behind the school, apparently having determined that 7 was not enough, and that a more emphatic number would produce a different result. Someone in the group had brought a phone with an external speaker playing aggressive music at distorted volume. Dagu stood at the front of his assembled people with the bearing of someone who considered this moment historically significant. A new mission appeared while I was walking across the school grounds toward the garden. The system described a middle-aged man with a crippled body and depleted internal energy, needing to survive a many-against-one assault, and offered the treasure appraisal technique as reward. The description of the host's physical limitations did not apply to me in any meaningful way. I turned on my phone's recording function. Dagu delivered a speech. He said I was the most arrogant person he had ever encountered, that he found this quality personally offensive, and that he planned to address it. I looked at the assembled group with mild amusement and told them, at volume, that none of them knew how to respect their teachers, none of them were filial to their parents, and none of them would produce anything of value once they entered the wider world. I called them rotten potatoes and bad eggs, and said that when they entered society, they would be scum. I pointed the phone at Dagu's face while I said all of this to document his reaction. Dagu made a sound that began his language and became something more primal, and kicked at me. I caught his ankle in the air. I began moving backward at 8 steps to chase the cicada speed, which was considerably faster than Dagu could maintain on 1 foot, and his hip joint was forced to negotiate an angle it had not prepared for. The sound his trousers made when they gave way was distinctive. His followers rushed in from several directions. I swung Dagu into their path as a buffer, his own people's punches and kicks landing on him, while I moved in and out through the crowd 7 times without taking contact, my footwork tracking through gaps that closed slower than I moved. Dagu eventually ordered everyone to stop because he could no longer absorb the impact. I set him on the grass and stepped away, confirmed the footage on my phone, and waited. The teachers arrived a minute later, Hu Guibun and Jim Gon and several senior-year subject teachers coming as a group, having been alerted by Gangi on his way to order noodles. They came around the corner expecting one outcome and found another. The entire Zetian gang disheveled and boot-printed and demoralized, Dagu sitting in the grass looking like someone who had been inside a bag full of hammers, and me standing off to the side without a mark. Teacher Hu's expression as she processed this scene was the expression of a person whose model of the world is requesting significant revision. The teachers began their disciplinary operation, demanding names and class numbers and calling parents. Zhang Jie and Gabi, who had been concealed behind a flower bed during the proceedings, quietly rolled themselves in the dirt and joined the line of people being scolded, choosing accountability over continued uncertainty. The treasure appraisal technique arrived in my mind fully formed. I had read enough treasure appraisal novels to understand what this represented in practical terms. The ability to see the true value of any object I examined. In a world with antique markets and genuine collectors and vast quantities of clever fakes, this was not a small advantage. This was essentially a commercial superpower waiting for a market to be applied to. After the garden, Gangi and I ate at the banmian shop. Large bowls, thin noodles, extra chili. Gangi ate garlic between noodle slurps with the focus of a serious practitioner, teared up from the spice, and maintained a running argument for the health properties of vinegar, while adding quantities of it that I found medically alarming. He burped eventually with a depth and complexity suggesting the garlic and vinegar had combined into something new entirely. I relocated my position slightly. He looked at me with red eyes from the vinegar spice and said thanks for today was not enough for what he wanted to say, that we were brothers, that he would not forget it. I said we were brothers and that he should stop there. When we walked back to school, the gate area was already full of students discussing the garden incident. Chu Gyogyo heard my name, pushed through, found me undamaged, and shifted from worry to relief in a moment that expressed itself as mild irritation in her expression. I said these things happened, that Dagu seemed to have some brain irregularities, and that any person who operated under that name had already made several poor choices. She covered her mouth and her eyes crinkled. Liang Huanhuan and Zhou Mengyul watched from behind her with the invested attention of people watching a drama they are enjoying. Friday afternoon, the classroom was rearranged for the upcoming streaming exam, which required clearing out desk compartments. Gangi's school bag ended up so heavy that standing upright was a project. Mine was empty because I had moved items into the storage space throughout the week in small batches. When Gangi understood this, his expression moved through several stages and settled on philosophical resignation. He said he wished he had thought of that. I said the art of war rewarded forward planning. He said several things after that which I will summarize as agreement. We went to the Xicheng Internet Cafe afterward, which the student population of number 18 middle school had had designated the branch campus with the sincerity of people who genuinely meant it. No identification required. Old machines, ventilation that the word minimal would generously describe. Corners occupied by people in various states of engagement with content, not appropriate for all contexts. The compound smell of cigarettes and instant noodles and stale air combined into an atmosphere that was somehow comfortable for everyone inside. Gengi transformed the moment we walked in, his posture improving, his energy sharpening, the vitality of a person who has arrived at their natural environment. A new mission appeared while I was logging in. Skillfully use a Blue Star computer. Reward 10 black armored guards upon returning to Ganstar. I noted the upon returning qualifier. The system was now generating future conditional rewards. This was a pattern worth tracking carefully. I opened a browser and began working through past examination papers, model essay templates, perfect score examples, science content from physics and chemistry even though I was a liberal arts student. Because if I ever arrived in an ancient world, knowing how to explain salt refining or basic medicine could matter considerably. Gengi played games beside me, narrating his own performance in a running commentary that appeared to make him happy. He occasionally looked at my screen and said I was watching documentaries. I confirmed this. Gengi was playing games with great enthusiasm beside me. He had started what he called an intro bot match to build proficiency, and was describing his own champion performance in real time, narrating each kill, each objective, with the self-satisfaction of someone performing before an appreciative audience. He died 3 times in the bot match, which meant he was losing to artificial intelligence he had presumably defeated before. But this did not appear to affect his running commentary. He ended the match victorious and turned to me with an expression of triumph, demanding to know whether I had seen his performance. I said it was impressive. He told me to log in and play a match-made game with him. I said I would be a moment. I was in the middle of the search for information about how ancient water systems worked, because whoever controlled irrigation in an agricultural society controlled food production, and therefore population loyalty. And this seemed like exactly the kind of knowledge that a person arriving in a pre-modern world from the future would want. The internet in this era was a remarkable tool for exactly this kind of comprehensive preparation. Anything I could think of to search, someone had already written about it, organized it, argued about it in forums, corrected the errors in the arguments, and posted the corrections. When I had processed the academic material, I searched forum archives for information about surviving in historical periods, because if Gonstar was a real future destination, I needed to think about it practically. The collective wisdom that emerged covered knowing the language and protocols before arriving, maintaining low profile about unusual knowledge or abilities, having basic medical knowledge, understanding social hierarchies and which dynamics to align with, and not committing the specific category of errors made by drama protagonists who consistently prioritize sentiment over actual survival. The last category I analyzed at length and converted into a personal behavioral checklist of things I would never do regardless of how sympathetic the circumstances. The mission completed while I was reading about dynastic social hierarchies. Skillful computer use confirmed. No guards in hand, but the future promise was noted. When Gengi noticed the empty battery slot on his electric scooter, he pointed at it with the face of a person receiving news that is small but specifically unwelcome. 5 UN spent on internet time, 500 UN of battery lost. I looked at the security camera above the internet cafe entrance, thought through the operational logic of a place that ran without ID requirements and apparently had business relationships with nearby scrap operations, and formed a plan. I told Gengi to bring his heavy school bag and follow me. Inside, at the counter, a young woman with elaborately multicolored hair was examining her own makeup in a small mirror. I leaned on the counter with the conspiratorial manner of someone sharing a useful secret and asked quietly whether she happened to know a place nearby that bought electric scooter batteries. She looked up, assessed my presentation, found it acceptable, and told me about a scrap recycling station 200 meters to the right, handing over a business card with the ease of someone who had shared this information before. I thanked her warmly, promised to return when I had funds and treat her to spicy hot pot, and left. Gengi followed behind me in the specific state of someone who has watched a scene unfold without quite following the mechanism. He asked what I was planning. I said it was a honey trap combined with using one knife to do someone else's work. He said the art of war was being applied to a battery theft investigation. I said the principles were universal. The 200 meters to the right took us past a row of small shops, a dumpling restaurant that was still serving the tail end of lunch, a laundry that had a complicated arrangement of folding tables visible through the window. At the end of the block, behind a concrete wall with a hand-painted sign, was the scrapyard. The scrapyard was in a residential area, run by a short middle-aged man sitting outside with a novel on his lap. The cover belonged to a popular urban cultivation genre, the kind with a certain type of female character prominently featured and a title promising the protagonist some kind of supernatural advantage. He was deeply engaged with it. He looked up when we arrived with the slight irritation of a man interrupted during a good chapter. In the courtyard behind him, through an open gate, 4 bald men with gold necklaces were eating barbecue and drinking beer, loud and comfortable in the way of people who have arranged their afternoon exactly as they prefer it. An old van was parked at the edge of the courtyard with some goods visible through the open door. The treasure appraisal technique activated as I scanned them. Labels appeared over each necklace. Pure gold, 3,920 yuan. Gold-plated silver, 1,030. Pure gold, 4,050. Sand gold, 250. I noted this and let old Joe lead us through the inner room and out to the back shed where batteries were stored. Gengi's battery was in the corner, recognizable. I filmed everything while discussing future supply arrangements with old Joe, speaking with the easy confidence of someone who has steady volume and reliable supply chains. He grew enthusiastic. I stepped aside to make a call, explained the situation in 2 sentences to Officer Chu Jianjun, and received confirmation that he was on his way. The yard gate came off with a sound like punctuation. Officers subdued the barbecue crew before any of them managed to complete standing up. Old Joe stood in the shed doorway looking between Officer Chu Jianjun and me, and back again with the expression of a man whose understanding of the last 20 minutes has completely collapsed. He had been planning a profitable partnership. He was now wearing a silver bracelet. The officer confirmed more than 30 batteries in storage, accepted my video recording as evidence, said this kind of documentation saved everyone significant time. Officer Chu gave a statement at the station that took the rest of the afternoon. The station had the institutional smell of any building where serious work happened at all hours. Cleaning product and paper and something underlying that was just the smell of authority operating continuously. The process of giving a statement was straightforward. Sit across from a police officer, answer questions in order, confirm the written summary was accurate, sign. The officer taking the statement was young and thorough and asked sensible clarifying questions. When I showed him the video recording, his expression did the thing where a professional notes that something is better than expected without wanting to show it. Afterward, Officer Chu Jianjun invited me to eat in the cafeteria before he drove me home. The police cafeteria food was excellent and varied. On the drive home, he asked whether I was dating his niece. I confirmed with great precision that Chu Gyogyo and I were desk mates with an excellent relationship. He gave me a look that indicated he had already decided what he thought regardless. He asked whether I liked her. I laughed in the manner of someone who has chosen not to answer while technically producing a sound. He said that if I liked her, I should pursue it boldly and not leave regrets. And then he sang a portion of a song to illustrate this advice, no note of which was in a recognized key. I indicated that my neighborhood entrance was visible and asked to be dropped there. At home, my parents had assembled with the belt and feather duster. I told the day's story in full. Both instruments were quietly set aside by the end. My mother said earnestly that doing good was important, but self-protection came first. My father asked about food. I mentioned the police cafeteria favorably and said civil servant life was looking appealing from a meal's perspective. They laughed before catching themselves. My mother turned to my father about the car promise, and I used this as cover to leave. That was day 1. Saturday morning, Gangi was at the door at 6:30 with a bag of Rujiamo to thank me for the battery situation. I had been asleep. I looked at the bag, revised the plan to slap him and let him in. He changed shoes without being asked, went to my room while I washed, and stood in the middle of it looking at the books spread across every surface. Art of War, 36 Stratagems, Tang and Song Poetry, I Ching, Japanese Primer, Korean Primer, Classical Medicine Texts, Historical Social Hierarchy Charts, Meridian Diagrams, Chemistry Notes, and more. He picked up the I Ching, opened it, and announced it appeared encrypted. My father came out, greeted Gangi with the warmth of a man not fully conscious, confirmed Old Street was a fine destination, said to stay away from the water, and returned to his room. We rode to Nanchung Old Street on Gangi's scooter, me on the back eating Rujiamo, watching the Saturday traffic of people going to cram schools and overtime work, and the early bird market. The street had an elaborate entrance archway and substantial crowds by the time we arrived. Serious collectors, casual visitors, hopeful treasure hunters, and the vendors who served them all. The treasure appraisal technique activated the moment I entered and began labeling everything in my visual range. The labels were translucent and appeared just above each object, showing value in yuan as a precise figure. Glass bracelet, 2 yuan. Counterfeit silver dollar, 2 yuan. Counterfeit gold bracelet, 2 yuan. Every stall was between 2 yuan and 5 yuan in genuine content, regardless of what the price tag said. The price tags on some of these items were in the hundreds. One stall had a bronze vessel labeled as a high-quality reproduction with an actual value of 30 yuan and a price tag of 2,000. The stall owner was sitting behind his merchandise with the expression of a man who was not in a hurry and expected at least one of the tourists passing through to find this attractive. It occurred to me that the treasure appraisal technique was not just useful for finding genuine items, it was also useful for understanding the full structure of the market, what things were actually worth versus what they were being offered at, and therefore how the entire commercial ecosystem was operating. This was information. Information was always useful. I moved through the first section methodically, letting the labels accumulate, mapping the pricing strategy of each vendor as I passed. One stall had slightly better fakes than the others, things that would require more than a quick glance to identify as reproductions. Another had worse fakes, but an unusually friendly vendor who had clearly developed a pattern designed to make people feel good about the purchase. A third had one genuine item, a small jade piece that the treasure appraisal technique labeled at 4,000 yuan, priced at 3,800. The vendor probably knew it was real and was selling it honestly. I did not buy it because I was not in the market for jade today, but I noted the stall for future reference. Gangi pointed at a 4-goat square Zun reproduction with excitement and asked whether it was Shang or Zhou dynasty. I said it was probably from last week. Several passing people laughed. The stall owner's expression was tired. Then I saw the scorched black bracelet on a fat man's stall, labeled by the treasure appraisal technique as genuine gold worth 3,500 yuan, lying among a collection of entirely fake merchandise. The fat boss sat on a small stool fiddling with play walnuts that had accumulated some history from being handled. His stall displayed the standard 2 yuan shop contents with optimistic price tags. I positioned myself in front of it and began asking questions about birthday gifts loudly enough for pedestrians to hear. When he produced a jade cicada and named a 1,000 yen price, I said loudly that a jade cicada was a traditional mouth plug for corpses, placed under the tongue after death in historical burial practices, and asked whether he was recommending it for a birthday or a death anniversary. He put it away and produced a pine and longevity plaque. I said it had a single tree, meaning a single tree cannot support a house, and featured a green turtle which had unavoidable associations for anyone who knew the cultural vocabulary. He produced a landscape piece with no water. I said that indicated no fortune. He produced a landscape with mountains, water, and an elderly figure. I described the configuration of the toothless figure sitting with his back to the mountain and the water flowing downward below him. And Gangi, who had been following the analysis with growing comprehension, hit upon the assembled meaning suddenly and announced it with the enthusiasm of someone who has succeeded at a puzzle they did not know they were attempting. Approximately 15 bystanders experienced physical reactions suggesting they found this extremely funny. The fat boss told us to pick whatever we wanted and consider it settled. I selected the scorched black bracelet and the 2 shiny fake ones and named a price of 5 yuan for all 3. He calculated the arithmetic on dignity versus actual costs, determined that the marginal loss was better than continuing to be the comedic subject of a gathering crowd, and agreed. I tucked the black one into my hand, tossed the fakes to Gangi and told him they would make excellent accessories for his 2 cats, and walked toward the gold recycling shop down the street. The young man at the counter looked at the scorched bracelet, then at me, then at the door. I asked the day's recycling price, 260 yuan per gram. I said to test the bracelet. He cut it with professional shears and looked at the cross-section without speaking. He ran the purity instrument. 999 purity. He asked for a purchase receipt. I said I had bought it at a street stall, 3 for 5 yuan. No receipt existed. He looked at the ceiling for a few seconds, did the calculation on the weight, and paid me 3,484 yuan. Gangi asked outside whether the other 2 bracelets might also be genuine. I told him they were copper-plated. He nodded with the expression of someone who has received accurate information they find slightly disappointing. We ate 2 candy haws on a stick each from a vendor selling them from a cart, which Gangi had been eyeing since we entered the market. The vendor wrapped the haws in a thin coating of crystallized sugar that snapped cleanly when you bit into it. Good. We ate them while walking, Gangi narrating a running comparison between the old street candy haws and various other candy haws he had eaten in his life, building to a ranking system that he apparently had developed over years without sharing it with anyone. I listened and occasionally agreed with specific assessments. We spent 2 hours walking the antique and secondhand section of the market, a longer and more serious stretch with calligraphy, old books, porcelain, snuff bottles, inkstones, and furniture. The treasure appraisal technique worked through everything. Every item was reproduction, imitation, artificially aged, artificially colored. Not one genuine item in the entire stretch. I was developing a dragon-slaying skill, but had found no dragon. Lunch at the Yanyu Pavilion, a restaurant in the middle of the 2nd Street styled after a costume drama inn. Period-dressed servers, a large television playing a martial arts drama. The content on screen was of a variety Gangi found interesting. I poured tea from the table's teapot and saw the label, Purple Clay Teapot, value 250,000 yuan. I set the teapot down carefully. The server I called over said it was a handicraft from the antique street, replacement value 280 yuan. I said to note it. We ate 3 dishes and 2 bowls of rice each. When the meal was finished, I went to the front counter with the teapot under my arm, paid for everything including 280 yuan in compensation for a teapot I described as having broken, and left before anyone could develop questions they were not sure how to formulate. Gangi followed me out walking at a slight angle. Bogu Pavilion sat across the street with the atmosphere of a serious antique dealer. Proper glass display cases, curio shelves, genuine items among the reproductions. Museum quality arrangement. I told the young man at the counter I had an heirloom piece to sell. He went to get the appraiser. Teacher Hu Shuo was a small old man in a tang suit who introduced himself with the evident pleasure of someone who had been deploying this introduction for many years and found it reliable. He put on white gloves, picked up the teapot with professional care, examined the craftsmanship from several angles, located and confirmed the signature mark inside the lid, and took a slow, careful breath through the open spout. He described it as an early work by a famous late Qing dynasty master of purple clay art, praised the lotus form shaping and the natural quality of the carving, said he could still detect the fragrance of tea inside. Gangi, sitting beside me on the sofa with his hands folded in his lap, made a sound in his throat and converted it to a cough by what appeared to be pure determination. Teacher Hu offered 300,000 yuan. The system's treasure appraisal technique had estimated 250,000. There was a moment in the silence after his offer, when he watched me and I watched him, with the parallel calculation of two people who both knew they were in a negotiation, and both knew the other person knew it. He had appraised the teapot at 250,000 and offered 300. This meant he believed the actual market value to be higher than his offer, possibly considerably higher, and he wanted to close the transaction while I was still potentially uncertain of the true value. The treasure appraisal technique's output was a precise number, and I trusted it, which meant his offer was above market and represented a genuine attempt to close at a fair but favorable rate. A counter-offer above his offer would tell him I knew the market, which was information I did not necessarily want to disclose on a first transaction. I kept my expression neutral, said the current market value was around 250,000, but that appreciation was likely, said it was a pleasure doing business. We completed the transaction. He said for any future pieces I should bring them to Bogu Pavilion first. We deposited the money at the nearby ICBC branch. The branch was the standard type, tiled floors, numbered ticket dispenser, a row of waiting seats occupied by people at various stages of financial patience. 2 tellers visible through glass. The young woman at our window was probably 22, in the standard blue uniform with a neat collar pin, and she processed the first transaction, my 200,000 deposit, without visible reaction. The second transaction, Gangi's 100,000, she processed with equal professionalism. And then the third transaction, which was my instruction to transfer the 100,000 from my account to Gangi's, caused her to pause with her hands above the keyboard for a moment and look up at both of us with the careful professional expression of someone who is deciding whether asking questions is within the scope of her role. Gangi, who had been refusing verbally throughout the walk from Bogu Pavilion and showing no signs of accepting, went quiet when he saw the confirmation receipt print out. New accounts, 200,000 to mine, 100,000 to Gangi's. He refused several times with genuine feeling. I said that if one becomes wealthy, one does not forget each other, that his cats and the fat boss's bad temper had led me to the bracelet, and that this was accurate accounting rather than charity. The young woman at the window was struggling visibly with professional composure. Gangi's eyes went red. He grabbed my arm and called me godfather, then mentioned that he had a cousin, young and beautiful, excellent figure, long legs, gentle temperament, currently unattached. My interest was immediate. The mission completed. Ultimate recognition of the suspected child of fortune. Reward fortune empowerment confirmed. I thought about the system's categorization of Gangi as a probable child of fortune. His luck was demonstrably unusual. Gold in a pile of fakes, a late Qing masterpiece on a restaurant table. Perhaps fortune expressed itself through unlikely instruments. I was not going to argue with results. At the fishing equipment shop, I bought a rod for my father and a gold ring because equal treatment of both parents was a principle worth maintaining. At the gold shop, I bought jewelry for my mother, for future gifting occasions. For Chu Gyobyo because she had mentioned once that she liked 4-leaf clovers, and the gold section had a good pendant. Gangi bought his mother a necklace and bracelet. I reminded him that omitting his mother would produce an educational evening. He noted this. At home, handing gifts to both parents simultaneously produced expressions that moved from ready to discipline through confusion to genuine warmth. I came in with the chest slightly elevated and the bags in both hands, said that I was back and they should come see what I had brought. My father M. Gyonse had been sitting in front of the television watching a football match in which his team was losing badly. My mother, Jang Solwa, came out of the kitchen where she had been cooking something that was in the process of producing good smells. Both of them looked at the bags and then at me with the particular parental expression that means we want to be pleased, but we need more information first. I handed the jewelry bag to my mother and the fishing gear to my father at the same time. The look on my mother's face when she opened the bag and found the gold necklace and gold bracelet was the look of someone who has been handed something they have wanted for a long time, without quite allowing themselves to want it openly. She asked where the money had come from. I told the whole story. The black bracelet, the gold recycling shop, the restaurant teapot, Bogu Pavilion, the ICBC, and the 100,000 I had given Gangi, including the reasoning. Both parents went still when I mentioned the amount. My father set down the fishing rod he had been examining and looked at me carefully. My mother sat down. My father said eventually, slowly, that giving the 100,000 to Gangi had been the right thing to do. My mother agreed and said she was not angry, she was surprised, and those were different things. She said that the natural instinct to share good fortune with a friend who had helped was a sign of good character, and that she had always known I had it even if she had occasionally doubted whether it was going to show up in visible ways. My father made a sound that meant he agreed without wanting to say it directly. I accepted this assessment. My mother took the remaining bank card and began planning immediately. The television in the living room had been producing a discolored stripe on the left side for 2 years. The range hood above the stove leaked oil drops onto the counter in a way that required constant cleaning. The washing machine made a noise during the spin cycle that my father had been meaning to have fixed for 18 months. She named these things in order with the efficiency of someone who has been maintaining a mental list and has just been given permission to act on it. My father looked at the fishing bag and then looked at the gold ring box I had produced from my pocket separately, and spent a long quiet moment with the ring before putting it on and looking at his hand. He said he had been wrong when he called the car I mentioned a dream. He said when I made something of myself he would say so publicly and let himself be proud. I told him he was already allowed to be proud and that the G-class comment had been mostly joking anyway. He said he knew I was joking but that the 190,000 was not a joke and he wanted to make sure I understood what it meant for the family. I said I understood. He put his arm around me briefly and then went back to the fishing gear, examining each component with a fisherman's attention to quality. My mother took the bank card with the remaining 190,000 yuan and began planning. A new television, a better range hood, a washing machine that did not creak, and a discussion about housing prices with the focus of someone who has been waiting for a reason to act on this thought for years. My father held up his hand to look at the gold ring and sat with the quiet satisfaction of a man planning how to display it to fishing companions. He hugged me and said things that belonged to his record and mine rather than this account. I closed my bedroom door and heard my parents still talking in the living room, my mother's voice describing exactly which housing complex she had been watching the prices on. My father responding with the engaged energy of someone who has been given a good reason to think about something he cares about. From down the hall, I could also hear the sound of my father trying to call old Jen on Gangi's family's phone to thank them for raising a son who was a good friend to me. The conversation that resulted lasted over an hour and covered fishing, housing investment strategy, child-rearing philosophy, and eventually the specific question of where to cast a line when the water temperature dropped in autumn. My father was going to invite old Jen fishing. They were going to become friends. This was entirely predictable, and I found it genuinely satisfying. I sat at my desk and thought through what the afternoon's events had produced. 3,484 yen from the gold bracelet plus 300,000 from the teapot, totaling 303,484 yen total in earnings. From a single Saturday outing, of which I had kept 203,000 and given Gangi 100,000, putting the remainder toward my parents. The treasure appraisal technique had paid for itself in the first use by many orders of magnitude. The system had been unusually generous this week. 9 missions completed across 2 days, and the rewards ranged from physical enhancement to cultivation techniques to money to spatial storage. The pattern was becoming clearer. The system was structured around the stages of a transmigrator establishing themselves in a new world. Legal identity, language, social integration, resources, self-defense capability, financial stability. Each mission mapped to a survival and growth need. The rewards were calibrated to what a destroyed middle-aged martial artist would need to recover and prepare for return to an ancient world. But because I was completing them from a position of existing modern life, each one was essentially free in terms of effort, and the reward was pure gain. Full inventory, muscle and bone shaping pill consumed and working continuously. Fruit of wisdom consumed, permanent intelligence enhancement delivered. Storage space operational. 8 steps to chase the cicada active. Great Vajra palm available. 10 tails of gold from the literature copying mission sitting in storage space. 10 black armored guards pending on Ganstar. The everlasting spring technique, received for the money-earning mission, needed full examination. I sat cross-legged on the bed, right index finger to the sky and left to the earth, pressed the tip of my tongue to the roof of my mouth, and felt for the true chi. The muscle and bone shaping pill had left all meridians open. The true chi moved without any obstruction from the first moment. Before I could begin directing it along cultivation pathways, it began moving on its own, following the everlasting spring technique's routes automatically, a small bright current moving through the meridian system in complete self-guided circulation. With each completed orbit, it grew fractionally stronger. I stood up to test whether movement stopped the cultivation. It did not. I sat back down and confirmed. I walked across the room, still running. The everlasting spring technique had automatic cultivation built into its structure, operating independently of my physical state, continuously improving my internal power at every moment, without requiring any active effort from me. I sat with this for a moment because as advantages went, this was remarkably thorough. I reviewed the full reward list and thought about Ganstar. 3 of my 9 rewards had been martial arts techniques. The system had also given gold in a future guard unit. The distribution told a clear story. Ganstar was dangerous. It would require combat capability and resources. And the system had been generating both. I had been treating Ganstar as theoretical. The reward pattern suggested treating it practically instead. I called the system by its formal address, the old geezer invocation that it appeared to respond to, and asked for more missions. The response came promptly: spar with an expert on Blue Star to verify and consolidate what had been learned. Reward an official appointment document for the county magistrate of Yunzhou. I thought about why the system would give me a county magistrate's appointment document. The old magistrate who had been hauled away by the mental health team had been thrown off a cliff before he could present his credentials at his new post. When the system eventually sent him back to Ganstar, he would need those documents to have official standing. The system was producing them through my missions because I was the bound host doing the work. This was the Laodang system operating consistently, confused about who it had found, but methodical in its outputs. A gym flyer in my trash can advertised combat classes with an award-winning coach at the new gym near the community entrance. I retrieved it, checked the details, and went to tell my parents I was going for a walk. My father was on the phone with old Zhen, Gangi's father, having moved from the initial awkward call about the 100,000 yuan into an apparently very enjoyable conversation about fishing spots. They had been talking for what appeared to be an extended time and showed no signs of stopping. My mother was in her warm post-windfall mood. She handed me the trash bag on the way out and said to go ahead, that they were not cooking tonight. I dropped the trash in the bin downstairs and walked toward the community entrance with my hands behind my back. The night market was running in full operation. Skewer stalls, fried tofu, spicy hot pot, grilled sausages, the compound aroma of street food at dinner time layering over itself into the specific thick atmosphere of an evening that does not require anything additional to be complete. People were walking dogs and pushing strollers and playing mahjong in the small pavilion, and running laps past the food stalls with expressions of active internal conflict. The gym sat next to the night market in an arrangement that was either a commercial conflict or a perfectly designed ecosystem. Get fat from the stalls, then walk into the gym. Someone had thought through this loop. I collected a brief dinner from a few stalls, because it would have been discourteous to the stomach to walk past all of it, then went into the gym. 2 receptionists at the front desk in white shirts with ponytails. One with a figure that was notable immediately. One with a snaggletooth that showed when she smiled, which was charming in a specific way. I had thoughts about the demographic calculus of the placement, but kept them to myself. I asked about combat classes, said I wanted to try a trial session and test the coach's level directly. Da Zhenzhen picked up the walkie-talkie and called for Coach Yun. A cool voice confirmed through the speaker. A minute later, Coach Young-gae came through from somewhere deeper in the gym. She was tall with long legs and the grounded, balanced gait of someone who had been training seriously for years. Willow leaf eyebrows, peach blossom eyes, wheat-toned skin, the measured professional distance of someone who has drawn her lines clearly and intends to maintain them. I looked at her footwork first before anything else. The weight distribution, the balance between each step, the slight forward lean that indicated trained fighting stance had become natural posture. This was someone with genuine foundation. She introduced herself as Yun Ge, the combat coach. She offered a tour of the facilities. I said a tour was not necessary and that I needed a combat coach and wanted to proceed directly to the trial session. She looked at me for a moment with the careful attention of someone checking whether there were ulterior motives behind the stated purpose. She appeared to decide I was sufficiently focused on actual training. She said to follow her. On the second floor, we passed the yoga room where a class was in session. I looked through the glass door with the attention of someone considering the format from a practical perspective, then turned away. I asked whether the yoga class accepted men. She said not yet due to low enrollment on the men's side, though free open classes were offered weekly. I mentioned wanting to sign my parents up and noted that free open classes every week was excellent value. The line of her shoulders shifted fractionally in a way I chose not to comment on. The octagon cage was at the end of the combat area. She explained the warm-up protocol, stretching to open the joints, shuttle runs, 10 minutes of light movement to prepare everything and reduce injury risk, then into the cage for actual work. She asked whether I had brought workout clothes. I told her I had not, but was ready to go through the warm-up protocol. She moved to the edge of the area and began demonstrating stretches with the efficient manner of a coach who has done this many times and needs to see what the new student is working with. I followed each movement with care, watching her technique, mapping the precision in each position. During the shuttle drills outside the cage, my footwork was exactly as calibrated as I chose to make it. Controlled, nothing shown that was not intended. I was standing at the edge of the cage with 8 steps to chase the cicada in my legs, great Vajra palm in my hands, the true chi of the everlasting spring technique moving through my meridians at that exact moment, having moved through 2 real fights in the past 2 days without taking any contact. The mission reward was 1 completed sparring session away. Coach Yun-gae had genuine martial arts foundation and had won competition awards, which made her the closest thing to an expert on Blue Star that the mission required. I was going to enjoy this thoroughly. Outside, somewhere in the city, the old magistrate was presumably still in a mental health facility, still insisting loudly about imperial appointments and dynastic legitimacy, still confused about what century this was, still waiting for the system that had found me instead of him, to work out what had happened. I did not plan to find him and explain the situation. The system was issuing missions, the missions were completing, the rewards were extraordinary. I had photographic memory and a storage space and automatic cultivation, and 2 bank accounts and a bet with my desk mate about the sprint class examination that I was going to win, and a new sparring match in an octagon cage in a gym that smelled faintly of rubber and institutional cleaning product. And ahead of me, every mission the system was eventually going to generate, all the coins I was going to pull from it before it understood what I had done. The Liaodong system had not found the right person. The right person would have been a broken 58-year-old magistrate grateful for any assistance and earnestly trying to return to a dangerous ancient world. What it had found instead was a 17-year-old who had read thousands of novels about systems and knew exactly what to do with one. The system was about to find out what that difference meant. I stepped up to the cage and asked Coach Youngge to teach me how the warm-up worked. Before we went upstairs, I went into the changing area and borrowed a set of training clothes from the supply kept for trial students. A plain gray set that fit reasonably well. I changed, checked my reflection briefly, and followed her up. She ran me through a stretching protocol with the practiced efficiency of a coach who does this several times a day, checking my range of motion, noting where I was stiff, where I was not stiff. I was not stiff anywhere. She paused on this detail briefly but did not comment. For the shuttle runs, I moved at a pace that read as reasonably fit teenager, nothing more. She observed, said nothing, and then told me to follow her into the octagon. Inside the cage, she explained the basic principles: where to keep my hands, how to distribute weight between my feet, where the center of mass should be, how to move without telegraphing. The fundamentals of combat stance. She demonstrated each principle slowly and then asked me to replicate it. I replicated it correctly on the first attempt each time, which meant she moved through the fundamentals faster than she had planned and reached the point of actual sparring more quickly than a standard trial session would have. We began slowly. She threw light testing combinations, reading my response patterns, checking what I had and what I lacked. I blocked and deflected and countered with the great Vajrapalm's controlled power, and the 8 steps to chase the cicada's footwork at levels that were visibly above beginner but not so far above that they required immediate explanation. She adjusted her intensity upward, and I adjusted to match, and the session climbed gradually through levels that she was clearly mapping with care. At some point, she asked how long I had been training. I said I had not had any formal training before. She went still for a moment, looking at me with the focused attention of someone revising an assessment. Then she resumed, but the quality of her attention had changed. She was no longer demonstrating for a student. She was engaging with someone who had something worth engaging. The mission confirmed during a particularly clean exchange. Spar with an expert on Blue Star to consolidate what has been learned. Complete. The official appointment document for the county magistrate of Yunzhou would appear when I got home. We sparred for another 20 minutes after the mission completed, because stopping immediately would have been odd, and also because Coach Youngge was genuinely skilled, and the exchange was genuinely interesting. She had speed and technique and good judgment about distance and timing, the product of years of real competitive training. I kept my output at a level that read as exceptional natural talent and good instincts without revealing the full picture. At the end, she stood with her arms folded and looked at me with an expression that suggested she had more questions than she was currently asking. She said my natural aptitude was unusual. I thanked her. She asked again whether I really had no prior training. I said none that counted. She considered this and said I should come back, that there was more to develop. I said I would think about it. I thanked her, said goodnight to the receptionists, and walked back through the night market smelling of gym and fried food, pleased with the session. At home, the appointment document had materialized in my storage space exactly as expected. An ornate official seal document in classical Chinese on aged paper, granting the position of county magistrate of Yongzhou in the name of the Great Gone Court. It was beautifully made. It also had nothing to do with my life. I put it carefully in a corner of the storage space next to the gold bar and the 10 taels of gold, filed it under things the old magistrate would eventually need, and went to sleep. At the Gen household that same evening, according to what Gengi told me later, his parents had sat with the 100,000 yen situation for a while before deciding they needed to speak with my parents about it. They called, got connected to my father, and spent the next hour and 45 minutes discussing not the money, but fishing and housing prices, and how boys these days compared to boys of their generation, with the money question apparently resolving itself at some point as a background item that everyone agreed had been handled correctly by the young people. Gengi reported that his mother had looked at the gold jewelry he brought her and cried, and that his father had immediately claimed the fishing gear bag and started taking things out to examine them, and that the household mood was unusually warm that night, in a way that Gengi, being Gengi, attributed to the quality of the evening meal rather than to anything he himself had done. I thought about this. The fortune empowerment reward from the system had apparently done exactly what its name suggested. Not in any supernatural way, not through obvious intervention, but through the specific mechanism of sharing resources at the right moment, which had produced a chain of events that made multiple people's lives measurably better. The system had called Gengi a suspected child of fortune. I was now wondering whether the system had any idea what it meant when it assigned that designation, or whether it was making classifications based on criteria I did not fully understand. Either way, the result was good. Sunday passed quietly. I spent it reviewing the everlasting spring techniques cultivation pathways in more detail, practicing the great Vajrapalm and controlled exercises in my bedroom, working through more of the academic materials I had memorized. The everlasting spring technique was remarkable in a specific structural way that I had been thinking about since Friday night. Most cultivation methods in the novels I had read required the practitioner to sit still in a meditative position, consciously directing internal energy along specific pathways, spending hours in active concentrated practice to make incremental progress. The everlasting spring technique had none of these requirements. It ran automatically from the moment I started it, following the meridian pathways on its own without any active guidance from me, and every completed circuit strengthened it fractionally without requiring my attention. I had been sleeping and cultivating simultaneously since Thursday night. I had been eating breakfast and cultivating. I had been sitting in class listening to teacher Jin Gon explain the streaming exam format and cultivating the whole time, which meant that every hour of my ordinary student life was also a cultivation session. This was not a technique for a desperate middle-aged magistrate trying to recover in time for revenge. This was a technique designed for someone who had an ordinary modern life and was going to spend years in it before anything dramatic happened. It was almost as though the system had known, somehow, that its host was going to be doing something other than single-minded martial arts grinding. I chose not to think about what this implied about how aware the system actually was. The streaming exam was on Monday. I was not worried about the streaming exam. The 3 days of photographic memory had covered everything from 10th grade through 12th grade across every subject, and the permanent intelligence enhancement had made retention and analysis significantly better than my baseline. The sprint class was a foregone conclusion from my perspective, though Chu Gyogyo's confidence in her bet suggested she had not yet updated her model of who I currently was. The streaming exam was in 3 days. I was not thinking about it in the way that most students were thinking about it, which was to say I was not anxious. I was thinking about it the way a player thinks about a game they have already rehearsed extensively. What are the likely problem types? Where are the time traps? How do I pace through the sections? The answers to all of these questions were clear in my memory, organized and retrievable. I ran through the key formulas and essay structures before sleeping on Sunday night, not out of need, but out of habit. The 3 days of waiting had a specific quality that I noted because it was different from any examination preparation I had experienced before. My classmates in the regular class were visibly stressed in the way of people who have staked something on an outcome they cannot fully control. Some studied late, some stopped studying and paced, some sat with their notes open without reading them, their attention somewhere between the page and the future. Gangi had assembled an unusual amount of snack food and was using it as emotional infrastructure, working through a bag of dried tangerines with the methodical focus of someone whose exam strategy was caloric rather than academic. I found all of this humanly recognizable without sharing the anxiety that produced it. The fruit of wisdom had not made me unempathetic, it had just made me capable of watching things clearly without being pulled into them. I studied for the exam the same way I had been studying everything else since the fruit arrived, not because the material was difficult, but because proper preparation was how you respected something worth doing. One of the things the intelligence enhancement had done, which I had not anticipated and which I found genuinely interesting, was that it had made me better at noticing other people. Not in a strategic way, not in the way that strategic reading of people was a skill I had practiced from the art of war, but in the ordinary way that I now just paid more attention to what was happening around me in the classroom, in the hallways, and at the lunch table, and found that what I noticed there was interesting in a way it had not always been. Gangi was worried about the exam in a way he was not admitting even to himself. I could see it in how often he touched the bag of tangerines without eating them. Chu Gyogyo was genuinely prepared and would probably make the sprint class on her own merit. She moved through her review materials with the efficiency of someone who has covered the ground before and is running confirmation rather than learning. These things were obvious to me now in a way they had not been before. I did not know exactly what to do with the habit of seeing them, but I had the sense it would turn out to be useful. Monday morning, the streaming exam. The format was standard for Chinese high school testing, a morning of Chinese language and mathematics, an afternoon of the relevant elective subjects. I arrived early enough to pick a seat by the window, which offered natural light and a view of the courtyard where the small garden sat looking peaceful and unaware of what I had done in it 4 days ago. The examination papers arrived face down on the desks. When the invigilator said to begin, the sound of 50 sets of papers turning over simultaneously had the specific quality of a collective commitment. I sat down, worked through everything with the same systematic approach I had used on teacher Hu Guiban's English exam. Questions answered from memory, the analytical ones engaged with the enhanced intelligence the fruit of wisdom had left behind. The paper felt comfortable throughout, which was a strange and new experience. I had spent years treating examinations as something to be survived rather than performed in. This was different. In between the morning and afternoon sessions, Gangi slumped across from me in the classroom with the expression of a man who has submitted to fate. He said he had done his best, and that his best was probably the parallel class. I said that was fine and that the parallel class was not I. I said that seemed likely. He was quiet for a moment, and then said he was genuinely impressed by what had happened this week, and asked whether I would explain the transformation at some point. I said maybe eventually. He accepted this, and went back to eating the lunch he had bought. Chu Gyogyo came by the classroom during the lunch break with her 2 friends. She was trying not to look as though she was checking in on the exam situation, which meant she was obviously checking in on the exam situation. I said the morning had gone reasonably well. She said the morning had gone reasonably well for her also, with the specific emphasis of someone who expects to win a bet and is beginning to double-check her reasoning. I smiled and said nothing specific, which she found either reassuring or alarming. She seemed unable to decide which. The 3 days between the exam and the results were ordinary school days in the regular classes. I was still in the regular class until the new groupings were officially announced. The corridor notice board, which usually displayed announcements about club activities and upcoming events, became a magnet for students who walked past it frequently and pretended they were there for other reasons. I walked past it with the same frequency as everyone else, for the same stated reasons, with the same transparent actual interest. The results were posted 3 days later on the school notice board. Sprint class, 50 names in order of score. My name was third on the list. Chu Gyogyo's was 16th. We had both made it into the sprint class, which meant I won the bet on breakfast and she won the bet on being walked home. Except that since we were both in the sprint class, we would presumably be at school at the same times and leaving at similar hours anyway, which made the terms of the bet somewhat overlapping. She found me at lunch when the results went up, and stood across from me with her arms crossed and her mouth doing something between a smile and a pout. She said fine, she admitted it. She owed me breakfast. I said she had made it in herself so she could not be too upset. She said she was not upset. She was surprised. And those were different things. I said the bet had been fair and that I looked forward to the breakfasts. She uncrossed her arms and the expression settled into something warm. She said she still did not understand how I had changed so fast. I said I had been thinking about my future and realized that wasting time was not acceptable anymore. This was technically true, just incomplete. She looked at me for a moment and then nodded as though she had decided to accept the explanation and went back to her friends. Chu Gyogyo bought me a grain pancake with egg and extra filling the morning after results were posted, meeting me at the street vendor near the gate with the composure of someone who had decided that losing gracefully was its own kind of winning. She handed over the pancake without making it a ceremony. I said she did not have to start today if she needed more time. She said a bet was a bet and handed it over. We walked through the gate together and she mentioned that she was in the sprint class too, which I said I had seen, and she said she supposed we would be in the same room again after all. I said I supposed so, and tried not to look too pleased about this because I was fairly certain I was already failing at that, and she was probably aware of it. And both of us chose not to address it. The sprint class was a different environment from the regular classes. 50 students selected for strong academic performance, taught by the school's best teachers with focused intensity, all of them aware that the next several months were the most consequential period of their academic lives so far. The social composition was different. Some of the students had clearly been preparing for this their whole high school careers. And then there was me, who had materialized in the top 3 on the streaming exam, after 3 years of deliberate mediocrity and was currently a subject of quiet confusion for several of my new classmates. The sprint class had its social dynamics. There were students who had been competing for the top spot since 10th grade and found my appearance in the 3rd position genuinely disorienting. Some of them were matter-of-fact about it. I had apparently done well on the exam, and that was the system working as intended. Others had a harder time adjusting their model. A boy named Yu Songpyong, who had been consistently in the top 10 and had a particular investment in his academic ranking, watched me in class for about a week before stopping by my desk and asking directly how I had managed it. I said I had studied seriously over the summer. He looked at me for a moment and then nodded and went back to his seat, the expression of someone who has decided to accept an explanation they find slightly unsatisfying. He was not unfriendly after that, just watchful. Gangi was in the parallel class, which meant we no longer shared classes but still ate lunch together and still went to the internet cafe on weekends. He was in excellent spirits for someone whose academic trajectory had not dramatically improved, largely because he had 100,000 yuan in a bank account that his parents were managing carefully, and his mother had started looking at him with a new and somewhat misty expression of appreciation every time he came home. His father had gone fishing with my father twice already. The two families were developing what appeared to be a long-term social connection independent of Gangi and me, which I found both funny and mildly alarming given my father's demonstrated capacity for making enthusiastic promises. The classroom itself was on the 4th floor of the academic building, quieter than the lower floors, with windows that looked out over the school's back courtyard where the small garden sat. I looked at the garden once from the window and thought about Dagu, who I had last seen sitting on the grass looking like a man who had been inside a bag of hammers. I did not know what had happened to him afterward. The teachers had taken the whole group away, and I had heard through classroom gossip that several of them had faced disciplinary hearings and parental meetings. Dago himself had apparently been suspended for a week. None of them had approached me after. Teacher Hu Guibun made me a project. She had, apparently, been telling her colleagues about the English exam incident for days before the streaming exam results confirmed that something genuinely different had happened with me as a student. Once I was in the sprint class and she was one of my teachers, she began dedicating noticeable energy to making sure I reached what she considered my actual potential. She assigned extra reading, additional writing exercises, periodic one-on-one review sessions. I went to all of them because completing the missions the system assigned required ongoing contact with recognized experts, and teacher Hu Guibun qualified. The spring class's Chinese language teacher was a woman named Song, serious and methodical, who taught classical literature with the rigor of someone who believed the texts were not merely academic, but contained genuine practical wisdom. I found her classes more interesting than I had expected. The art of war I had memorized had already shifted how I thought about problems in ways that were becoming more visible to me as the days passed. The mathematics teacher, an older man everyone called Old Lee, ran his class like a training regime rather than an instruction period. He was direct about the fact that mathematics in the college entrance examination was where average scores and excellent scores separated, and he intended to close every conceptual gap his students had before the examinations arrived. I had memorized the relevant problem types and formulas during my photographic memory period, so the content was not new. But Old Lee's approach to problem solving, the habit of mind he was trying to cultivate rather than just the answers, was worth attending to. In the evenings at home, I continued cultivating the everlasting spring technique automatically while studying, because the technique ran independently of my activity and grew stronger with every circuit. I had also begun practicing the great Vajra palm properly in the mornings before school, measuring my output carefully to avoid leaving visible damage on anything. The technique built internal and external strength simultaneously, and the interaction with the everlasting spring technique's true chi was producing results that felt from the inside like standing on steadily rising ground. The system was quiet for several days after the gym session, which I understood to mean it was satisfied with my current progress rate and waiting for a natural transition point to issue the next mission. I spent the quiet period cataloging what I had and thinking about how to develop it. The storage space was 1 cubic meter. That was enough for most purposes, but not unlimited. I was storing the gold bar, the gold coins, the county magistrate appointment document, and various personal items that I preferred not to have in pockets. I had been thinking about whether there were other storage solutions available through the system. I called the system Old Geezer again after a week of quiet and asked about further missions. The response appeared. Having established oneself and made some money, it was now important to contribute back to the people around you and help those in need. The mission was to help 3 people with genuine difficulties. The reward was a marrow cleansing pill. A marrow cleansing pill. Even in the context of Gonstar cultivation texts, this was a significant item. Where the muscle and bone shaping pill had reshaped the physical form, a marrow cleansing pill would purify the marrow itself, fundamentally improving the quality of the body's foundation. This was an upgrade to what the first pill had already done. The system was still handing these things out for missions that were achievable through ordinary life. I thought about the mission parameters. Help 3 people with genuine difficulties. This was broad enough that I could be thoughtful about it. I was not going to help 3 people artificially. The system would not register something hollow. But there were real situations around me that needed addressing if I was paying attention. The system had always been assigning missions that fit naturally into my existing life rather than requiring extraordinary action. This one was similar. Look at what was actually happening around me and engage with it genuinely. The world was full of people with genuine difficulties. The challenge was not finding them, but choosing where to focus energy in a way that actually helped rather than performed helping. I had been reading enough classical strategy texts to know the difference between actions that solved problems and actions that made the actor feel good about themselves. The goal was the former. Gengi's situation was the first obvious one, though I had already addressed that with the 100,000 yen, which was presumably why the system had given him the Child of Fortune designation and closed that loop. The teachers I had been working with were generally fine. My parents were genuinely doing better since the infusion of funds had resolved some long-standing financial stress. The school had a bulletin board with periodic notices about student welfare situations. One of them had been up for 2 weeks. A third-year student from a rural county had been in the school on scholarship. The scholarship had encountered an administrative problem, and the student was temporarily unable to pay for cafeteria meals. The amount in question was modest. I found the student, a quiet boy in the basic class named Dae Jin Shin, went to the cafeteria administrator and paid 3 months of meals in advance under his account name, without identifying myself. The administrator noted this was unusual. I said the donor preferred anonymity. The second situation came to my attention through Gengi, who mentioned that the elderly woman who ran the small stationery shop next to the school had been having trouble with her landlord, who was trying to double her rent without notice. She had been in the same location for more than 20 years. I spent an afternoon reading about the relevant tenancy regulations, which I had memorized during the internet cafe session, identified 3 specific provisions that protected her against the increase as written, wrote them up clearly, and handed her the summary. She read it, looked at me, and asked who I was. I said I was a student who bought pencils occasionally. She sat down and started crying quietly, which I had not anticipated but understood. I said she should take the document to the local consumer protection office if the landlord continued pressing. She said she would. She also gave me 6 pencils, which I accepted. The third opportunity arrived unexpectedly. Liang Huanhuan, Chu Gyogyo's close friend, mentioned at lunch one day that her younger brother had been failing his junior high mathematics badly, and her parents were desperate enough to be considering expensive tutoring they could not really afford. I said I would help if she could arrange for him to come to the school library on Wednesday afternoons. She looked at me with the expression of someone unexpectedly offered a solution to a problem. I spent 3 Wednesday afternoons with her brother, a 12-year-old named Liang Jie who had good instincts and poor foundations, working through the gaps systematically. By the third session, he was doing grade-level work without assistance. Huan Huan was so grateful she brought me 2 boxes of milk candy and told Chu Gyogyo, who looked at me with a slightly different expression than she usually had, something more considered and specific. The mission confirmed. Help 3 people with genuine difficulties. Complete. The marrow cleansing pill arrived in the storage space, well packaged, and I scheduled it for a Saturday morning when I would have time to properly rest through whatever process it initiated. The Saturday in question, I told my parents I had some studying to do, and went to my room. I took the pill. Unlike the muscle and bone shaping pill, this one did produce a reaction, a warmth that started in the spine and radiated outward, lasting about 20 minutes, accompanied by a sensation that the interior of every bone was being reorganized. It was not painful, just thorough. I sat cross-legged through the whole process and let the everlasting spring technique run continuously, which seemed to help the pill's effects distribute evenly. When it finished, I felt like I had been refined from the inside, which was the only description that fit. I also grew 2 more centimeters, 187 centimeters. My school uniform needed adjustment again. The next mission appeared 2 days later. Acquire a valuable skill through dedicated practice and apply it meaningfully. The reward was a map showing one known treasure cache in Gang Star. I read the reward description twice. A treasure cache, an actual location of stored valuables in the world I would eventually travel to. The system was now providing preparatory intelligence for the Ganstar portion of the plan. I thought about which skill to develop that qualified as both valuable and meaningfully applicable. I had the Great Vajrapalm and 8 steps to chase the cicada. I also had all the medical knowledge from the classical texts memorized, and the art of war had already proven useful in real situations. But the system wanted something developed and applied, not merely memorized. The treasure appraisal technique was already being applied. The medical knowledge I had memorized from the Compendium of Materia Medica and the Yellow Emperor's inner canon was there but had not been tested in practice. The art of war had been useful in the battery theft situation and in the fight with Dagu's crew, but applying it further required opportunities. I went back to the gym. Coach Younga saw me come in and her expression did something that might have been satisfaction. I said I wanted to continue the trial session into proper training. She said that was what she had been hoping I would decide. We started twice-weekly sessions, working through the structured curriculum of combat sports, and I learned the formal framework for what I had been doing intuitively. Technique names, combination sequences, defensive systems. I was learning it correctly this time, building the vocabulary to match the ability I already had. After 4 sessions, during a particular exchange in the octagon where I moved in a way that was clean enough to be genuinely impressive regardless of context, Coach Young-gae stopped and looked at me. She asked again, calmly, whether I was certain I had never trained. I said my family had some old books and I had been reading them. She looked at me for a long moment and then said that whatever I had been reading, she wanted me to keep doing it, and then she resumed the session. I liked her. She was direct, technically excellent, and she had stopped trying to put me in a category that fit. The mission confirmed when I demonstrated a complete combat sequence from strike through defense to counter for her during a session, and she declared it correct and well executed. Acquire a valuable skill through dedicated practice and apply it meaningfully. Complete. The map of the Ganstar treasure cache appeared in my storage space, drawn on old paper in what appeared to be ink from Ganstar. The location marked with a notation I translated using the classical Chinese I had memorized during the photographic memory period. The cache was in a location I would need to be in Ganstar to find, which was consistent with everything else the system had been preparing me for. I held the map for a moment in my hands, thinking about what it represented. The system was building a picture of what I would find when I arrived. Martial arts, cultivation, gold, guards, official credentials, now a treasure cache location. The old magistrate's life had been consumed by revenge and examination grinding and survival in a dangerous world. Mine was going to be organized differently from the beginning. I had the resources and the preparation, and I was going to have the patience to do this correctly. The college entrance exam was approaching. The sprint class intensified its schedule in the final months. Additional evening sessions, mock examinations every 2 weeks, teacher review periods for every subject. I attended everything and performed consistently at the top of the class, which produced a variety of reactions from my classmates ranging from resigned acceptance to active bewilderment. Several of them had been in the top academic tier throughout high school and found the appearance of a previously undistinguished student at the 3rd place position somewhat difficult to process. I was not particularly sympathetic about this. The examination was going to happen regardless of how anyone felt about my ranking. Chu Gyogyo was 16th in the class, which was solid for the sprint class, and represented genuine work on her part. She was disciplined about studying in a way that made me respect her effort even though I did not share the experience of finding the work difficult. She covered my breakfast every morning as the bet required, meeting me at the street vendor area near the school gate and insisting on paying for the grain pancake and the drink, without complaint, which she did with the composure of someone who had made a commitment and intended to keep it regardless of her opinions about the outcome. I occasionally brought her tea from the canteen in exchange, because a good working relationship required some reciprocity, and she accepted this with the expression of someone who had been trying not to be pleased about it. Walking her home in the evenings happened naturally on the days I had not gone to the gym. She lived 20 minutes from the school in a residential area that was nicer than mine, and the walk became a routine that I looked forward to more than I had expected to. She talked about what she was reading, what she found funny, what she thought about the teachers, what she was planning to study in university. I listened and contributed when I had something worth saying, which I found was more often than it used to be. The fruit of wisdom's intelligence enhancement made me genuinely more interesting to talk to, or at least it felt that way from the inside. Her second uncle, Officer Chu Jianjun, occasionally called to ask how the studying was going and to make gentle inquiries about my intentions. He was enthusiastic about my potential as a police officer. I thanked him and said I was still considering options. He did not press but made clear that the offer of a recommendation letter to the police academy was standing. His niece, he noted once, seemed to be doing well. He said this with the particular tone of a person who was providing information they consider relevant. The system issued one more mission before the college entrance exams: compile useful knowledge for the journey to Ganstar and organize it in a manner that would survive travel between worlds. The reward was an increase in storage space capacity to 5 cubic meters, from 1 cubic meter to 5, the difference between barely sufficient and genuinely comfortable. I spent a week producing an organized reference document, medical formulas from the classical texts, historical social hierarchies from major Chinese dynasties, agricultural knowledge from Tiangong Kaiwu, basic chemistry and physics presented in terms translatable to ancient context, the political philosophy of the art of war and 36 stratagems applied to administration and conflict, and a personal protocol document for how to behave in various social contexts in an ancient martial arts world. I put all of it in the storage space, which updated to 5 cubic meters the moment the mission confirmed. I spent several minutes appreciating the additional room. The college entrance examinations came on the scheduled days in June. I sat in the examination hall with my pencils and my memory and my enhanced intelligence, and worked through every paper with the focused calm of someone who has been preparing for this specific event, with substantial supplementary resources. The Chinese exam was thorough and well designed. Mathematics was the longest session and the one that required the most active thinking rather than recall, which was also the most interesting. English, politics, history all proceeded in the same direction. I finished each section comfortably inside the time limit and had time to review. When the results were released 3 weeks later, my total score was a number that placed me in the range for Tsinghua and Peking University, which was exactly what teacher Hu Guiban had once said was possible in that moment during the English exam when she was explaining essay format to a student who already knew it, and exactly what old Jin had mentioned at the sprint class announcement in terms of the class's highest aspirations. My name appeared on the school's congratulations board alongside 3 other sprint class students in the same score range. Teacher Hu Guiban showed up at the school on the day of the posting and appeared to be having feelings that she channeled into several enthusiastic discussions with colleagues. Old Jin called my parents. My mother called me into the kitchen and made me sit down and then stood there for a while not saying anything, which was more expressive than anything she could have said. My father came home from work early that day, which he never did. He had a bottle of something with him. He said he was proud in the specific voice that men use when they have too much to say and have chosen to say very little of it. He set the bottle on the table and went to find glasses. The university application process was easier than I had expected, because my score was high enough to choose rather than accept, and I knew what I wanted. A Beijing university for the next 4 years made sense for access to resources, social connections, and proximity to serious academic work. Tsinghua's computer science program had been mentioned in several of the knowledge compilation sessions I had done, and with what I was planning to build toward, understanding information systems at a serious level seemed worthwhile. The acceptance letter arrived as expected. My parents received it at the door on a weekday afternoon. My mother called my father at work before calling me at the gym, which meant he heard about it before I did, which meant he had already arranged his expression into something controlled by the time he came home that evening. My mother made a sound when she handed me the letter that was not quite a word, but it did not need to be. That summer before university was the last stretch of time in which my life in this city was the same shape it had always been. I went to the gym 3 mornings a week. I walked through the old neighborhood in the evenings, past the night market and the school gate and the banmian shop. I went fishing with my father twice, at the spot old Jen had recommended, which was genuinely good water and produced several fish that my mother prepared in the way that was my father's favorite. Gangi and I played games at the internet cafe on weekends, and he told me about his college plans, which were modest and realistic and suited him. I gave him money for the enrollment fees when he said his parents were having trouble assembling the amount, framed as a loan that both of us understood would not be tracked. My mother and father looked at houses. They went on 2 weekends with a real estate agent my mother had found, came back both times with extensive analysis, and on the 3rd weekend put down a deposit on a unit in a complex that was under construction and would be ready in 2 years. The down payment came from the savings that had been accumulating for years, plus the money I had brought home. My mother calculated the monthly mortgage payment and said it was manageable. My father said that when I brought a girlfriend home, she would have her own room to sleep in rather than the current situation of the guest bed being in the same room as the computer. I said I appreciated the consideration. He He said it was not for my benefit, it was for the girlfriend's comfort. I said I appreciated that too. Chu Gyogyo was also going to Beijing, a different university, the language program she had been planning toward. We had an extended conversation about this during one of our evening walks, sitting on a bench in a small park near her building, and the conversation lasted until her curfew was approaching. She asked whether I was going to keep in touch. I said yes, which was true in the narrow sense that I intended to be in contact, and was also true in the broader sense that I had intentions about the direction of that contact which were beyond the scope of that particular conversation. She looked at me for a moment with the large eyes that had been my desk neighbor for a year, and said she looked forward to it. Then she went home. The day before I left for Beijing, I spent the evening in my room doing a full inventory of my storage space. The items inside, the muscle and bone-shaping pills effects were permanent and ongoing. The Fruit of Wisdom's effects were permanent. The everlasting spring technique's true chi had developed significantly over the months of automatic cultivation. What had started as a thin thread now a substantial current, and the technique itself had moved from beginner practice to established foundation. The 8 steps to chase the cicada had been tested in 2 real fights and several hundred practice sessions and was fully integrated. The Great Vajra Palm was similarly established. The marrow cleansing pills effects were permanent. I was 187 centimeters tall with the physique of someone who had been training seriously for years. Internal cultivation at a level I estimated conservatively as early foundation Xian Tian based on what the everlasting spring technique described as its progression stages, and reflexes and movement capability that were not explainable by any standard Blue Star framework. In the storage space, 10 taels of gold, the appointment document for the county magistrate of Yunzhou, the map to the Ganstar treasure cache, the organized knowledge compilation I had produced for the Ganstar preparation mission, a gold bracelet I had kept from the Old Street excursion as a reference point for the treasure appraisal technique, several personal items, and now 5 cubic meters of space to hold whatever came next. The system had been quiet for 3 weeks. I expected it to issue something new when I arrived in Beijing, some mission appropriate to the new environment, maintaining its pattern of assigning tasks that fit the transmigrator narrative of establishing oneself step by step in a new world. I was looking forward to finding out what it would come up with. The system had not yet figured out that its host was operating about 60 years younger than intended, and with a completely different motivation structure. Maybe it would never figure this out. Maybe it would issue missions forever that were trivially achievable through my existing student life, while handing out increasingly valuable rewards. That would be ideal, but even if it eventually corrected itself, even if it eventually discovered the error and reassigned to the actual old magistrate, everything I had already received was permanent. The techniques were in my body, the intelligence was in my mind, the cultivation was in my meridians, the gold was in my storage space. These things were mine regardless of what the system decided to do later. My mother packed my belongings with the careful attention of someone who is trying to think of everything and knows that is not possible. My father drove me to the train station, carrying 2 bags looking like a man who had more to say than he was going to say at a train station. He shook my hand when I got to the platform, which was unusual and therefore more meaningful than anything he could have expressed otherwise. I got on the train with 1 bag and a storage space full of things I would not need to explain to anyone. I thought, in the first hour of the journey, about the old magistrate sitting somewhere in the city I was leaving, presumably still in a facility for people who insisted they were officials from a dynasty that had not existed for over 100 years. He was waiting for his system to help him return to Ganstar and fulfill his destiny. His destiny was a dangerous ancient world where his martial arts had been destroyed and where he had already been ambushed twice by assassins. He had sworn to defying heaven and changing fate, which was a serious ambition for a man starting over with nothing. I was going to be him there, not to take anything from him, not to interfere with his plans. Just because I was prepared and he was not yet, and the system had given me enough of a head start that I expected to arrive in Ganstar ahead of his timeline, establish myself quietly, build a resource base, understand the power dynamics, and be positioned before any of the events his backstory predicted came into play. The 30 years east of the river, 30 years west, the poor youth not to be underestimated. He had sworn that vow in grief and fury over his failed examinations and broken engagement. I was going to demonstrate the same principle, without needing either the grief or the fury. The Liaodong system had not found the right person. It had found someone better suited to the task. The train moved north toward Beijing, and I let the everlasting spring technique run in my meridians and watched the familiar landscape change to something new, and thought about everything ahead. The city I was leaving had been the entire world for 17 years. Number 18 Middle School, the Banmian Shop, the Xicheng Internet Cafe, the night market, the Bogu Pavilion and Old Street with their 1,000 ordinary fraudulent items and occasional extraordinary one. Gangi's scooter and his electric enthusiasm, my mother's kitchen and my father's fishing radio, and the driving route to school that had become, in the past year, something I paid attention to instead of something I slept through. The Jen family's apartment above ours where old Jen was probably already planning the next fishing trip with my father. Chu Gyogyo's pinky at the desk, and the morning pancakes from the street vendor near the gate. Coach Younga's clean, precise footwork in the octagon, and the expression she made when she adjusted her assessment of me upward. The system had given me the tools to make the most of whatever came next. It had also, in its consistent structural confusion about who its host was, given me exactly the tools for making the most of a modern student's life, before any ancient world became relevant. I had a full year of high school remaining before the exams, then 4 years of university in Beijing, then whatever came after that before the Gone Star question resolved itself. A long runway. Long runways were good. I opened my phone, found the unfinished web novel I had been reading the week before the system arrived, and started from where I had left off. The protagonist was in a warehouse with the system he had just received, and was trying to figure out what it would let him do. I had considerable sympathy for his situation, and found I had opinions about his approach that were substantially more informed than they would have been a month earlier. I kept reading. Outside the window, the landscape moved from familiar to unknown, and the everlasting spring technique ran its steady circuits, and ahead of everything was a city and a university and all the questions I had not yet thought of yet, which was, in my experience, always where the interesting ones came from. The whole situation started with a gym that had just opened at the entrance of my residential complex, a mission that asked me to spar with a Blue Star expert to consolidate my skills, and a boxing instructor named Young Gay, who had fought professionally for 2 years and was taller than most women I had met. The system's reward for completing this mission was the appointment document for the county magistrate of Yangzhou, which meant the Lao Dang system was treating a high school student's martial arts sparring session as the equivalent of a returned magistrate validating his skills before taking office. I had made peace with this type of reasoning. I showed up at the gym in a hoodie, long pants and cheap sneakers, the complete outfit costing less than 200 yuan total, and my only real goal was to knock out the system mission as fast as possible, without breaking a sweat. Yoon Ge, who had the kind of calm composure you only get from 2 years in the ring, looked me over and told me the outfit wasn't convenient for exercise, that fighters wore short sleeves and shorts for a reason, but since this was just a trial lesson, she'd let it slide. I smiled and agreed. I had no intention of being here any longer than necessary. She walked me through a cross-arm stretch, a few shoulder rolls, some jogging laps, and then we taped our hands and stepped into the octagon. As she wrapped my left hand and started on the right, I just mirrored her movements automatically, doing both hands without having to think. Her willow leaf eyebrows twitched at that. She could tell I wasn't a newcomer, but she didn't say anything yet. We put on gloves. She demonstrated the basic guard stance with one fist forward and one protecting the chin, and I matched her form instantly. She looked like she was about to say something, then changed her mind and moved straight to footwork and punching coordination. I listened with genuine attention. With my photographic memory still doing its work, every detail landed immediately. When she held up focus mitts and invited me to run through the attack routines, I noticed her expression change the moment my fists connected. Even with me holding back, she could feel the weight behind them. I finished a set and asked, as pleasantly as I could, whether she used to compete. She said she had. 2 years of matches until her family put a stop to it. Then she turned the question back on me, asking if I had trained before. I told her something vague about old farmhand techniques passed down by an elder in my family, then said what I had actually come to say, which was that I wanted to test whether traditional martial arts worked in a real sparring match, and that I would treat her to dinner afterward if she would be my opponent. Her smile disappeared. The icy look she gave me had the word challenge written all over it, and she said in a flat voice that if I wanted to try, she would give me a proper sparring session. I thought that sounded very reasonable. She put down the mitts and pulled her gloves back on, calm and unhurried, movements with a certain elegance that was actually pleasant to watch. We stood face to face and she told me we could begin, and before the word was fully out of her mouth, a sharp front kick came at my abdomen. I swung my right arm into Bodhidharma brushing sleeves and swept her leg aside, then stepped forward into crouching star taming the tiger, both fists striding toward her face with as much tiger energy as I could muster, without actually sending her through the wall. She leaned back and used the momentum from her redirected leg to rotate her body, dodging my fists, then came straight back with a left hook at my ribs. I blocked it with my forearm and felt the force, which was genuine. If those had been Daegu's kids, they would have been face down already, but Young-Ge could actually trade moves. I grinned at that and flashed sideways using 8 steps to chase the cicada, appearing at her flank in what must have seemed like a single blink. I saw her eyes widen for half a second before her training took over and she maintained composure, throwing another quick combination. My body moved on its own, slipping angles, stepping through gaps, testing every footwork sequence from the technique while she worked to keep up. She was fast and her fundamentals were solid, so this was a genuine test of 8 steps to chase the cicada, which was exactly what the system mission required. After a few minutes I had validated everything I needed to, and I could see her breathing picking up. When she slowed down and switched to defense, waiting for me to overextend, I understood what she was doing. It was smart. I decided it was time to test the great Vajra palm while I had the opportunity, and called out that I was coming in, then lunged forward with both fists and fierce tiger pushes the mountain. She looked like she almost wanted to do a slide tackle. She kept her nerve and threw a counterpunch as she retreated, and our gloves collided with a dull impact that pushed her back several steps, while I absorbed it as if nothing had happened. I pressed forward with climbing the stars to grab the moon, which should have pulled her shoulders out of position, but the gloves reduced my grip, so I shifted into Bodhidharma brushing sleeves to parry her next punch and then came in low with scooping sand from the seabed, left fist rising toward her chest. The punch connected and she bounced backward, then told me with distinct irritation that I had clearly come to challenge the gym. The system message landed clean and bright in my mind right then, confirming the mission complete and telling me my reward, the appointment document for the county magistrate of Yunzhou, was ready. I lowered my hand and realized with some embarrassment that I had aimed for the chin but hit slightly low because the gloves were oversized. That was my official explanation and I was committed to it. I told Yunge it was a complete misunderstanding and asked if she was all right, looking at her with genuine concern. She took a slow breath, said injuries were unavoidable in boxing, asked if I still wanted to continue the lesson. I told her I had been too rude and offered to take her out to dinner to make up for it. She said dinner wasn't necessary since she wasn't off work yet, and if I really wanted to apologize, I should sign up for her class. She looked at me with a half smile that said she knew exactly what she was doing. I told her I would sign up on the spot. I went to the restroom first, ostensibly for personal reasons, but actually to examine the reward the system had dropped into my pocket again. The appointment letter looked like something from a period drama, but when I unrolled it, the script inside was completely unreadable. Gan Star and Blue Star apparently shared spoken language, since I had understood Niaosidai back in chapter whatever, but the writing systems were entirely different. I held the letter next to the gold bar I had stored away, the one engraved with characters from the Dogon dynasty, and those few characters I could read, which made the situation more confusing rather than less. I put both items back into my storage space and made a mental note that when I finally went to Ganstar, I would arrive functionally illiterate, which was going to create some very interesting situations at poetry gatherings. Back downstairs at the front desk, Young-go was chatting with two receptionists. I caught the way those two were smiling at each other when they saw me, the meaningful eye contact that clearly meant they had reached some very interesting conclusions about the teacher-student thing Young-gae and I had going on. I called out to her using her title. She responded by calling me Student Im, and the receptionist's expressions became even more eloquent. Yoon-ge took the contract paperwork and we settled into the lounge area, the music low and pleasant, a few gym members moving around in the background. She slid a course price list across the table. 10 lessons started at 1,500 yuan, with a discount if I took 30 at once. I said I would start with 10 and signed immediately. She looked up and asked my age with a hint of surprise when she found I was about to hand the contract back. She was checking whether it had legal force. I told her I was 17, that I could make my own decisions, and pushed the contract back toward her. She gave me a long look, said I was her first student at this gym, and added she would throw in a set of workout clothes and a bag. She signed her name and I raised my hand for a high five. She looked at my palm, then looked at me, then reached up and met it. The moment she started to lower her hand, I caught her wrist gently, which made her expression shift immediately toward alarm. I raised my own hand and slapped hers a second time, then a third, counting steadily all the way to 10, then released her and explained that the high fives were 1 per lesson, and that a high five was a vow, so she had to be the one teaching me all 10, no substitutes allowed. She stared at me with her head tilted sideways for several seconds. I looked at the system chat box and found the mission complete. Reward claimed. The lesser restoration pill was already in my pocket. Sparring with a Blue Star expert 10 times, technically satisfied. I had perhaps found the ideal way to interact with this particular system. She was still staring when I felt the weight in my pocket and told her I needed to use the restroom again. The restrooms here were new and not yet broken in, which I noted appreciatively. The look on Young-ge's face as I jogged away was something I did not fully wish to examine. From behind me, I thought I heard the sound of someone deciding something very incorrect about what was happening. In the restroom, I took out the lesser restoration pill, which looked exactly like a Malteser, small and round and pitch black, and tossed it straight in. It was a bit dry going down, but within moments a warm current erupted from my dantian in waves rather than the tentative trickle I had been operating with before. 30 years of true chi is not a figure of speech. It crashed through my meridians like a flood breaking a dam, surging into every acupoint at full speed. I looked at myself in the mirror and my eyes were bright and sharp, temples slightly prominent. The kind of look that serious martial artists in films have right before someone explains to them that their power level is impressive. I circulated the true chi through the great Vajra palm incantation, and my hands lit up with a faint white glow. The sync remained intact only because I deliberately dissipated it, which I considered a sign of personal growth. A first-class expert in 3 days, all because I had stolen a transmigration system intended for a different man who happened to share my name. I could barely believe it myself, but my Dantian was very insistently telling me it was real. I thought about the situation for a moment. I had picked up a melon seed the transmigration system had activated for me instead of the 60-year-old magistrate it was designed for. And rather than correct the error or notice it at all, the system had just kept issuing me missions and rewards as if I were the right person. This was either a profound flaw in the system's verification process, or the most fortunate misdelivery in the history of supernatural administrative errors. I asked the Laodong system to refresh the tasks, and it responded with a long internal monologue addressed to its supposed target, explaining that having transmigrated to Blue Star, he had studied hard to return to Ganstar, and now that he had reached first class, it was urgent that he learn advanced knowledge and take it back with him. The mission was to learn an advanced knowledge or technology that didn't exist on Ganstar, reward a health-enhancing pill. I washed my hands thoroughly, hummed a pop song about a younger sister and the color purple, and emerged from the restroom shaking my hands dry. This was called thoroughness, and I stood by it. Young Go was sitting in the booth waiting. When I sat back down, I noticed her cheeks were red in a way that had nothing to do with exercise, and her gaze was slightly drifted, not quite meeting mine. I asked why her face was flushed. She told me it was nothing, grabbed a tissue from the coffee table and threw it at me. I caught it, wiped my hands on principle, and lobbed the paper ball cleanly into the trash can at my feet without looking. At this point, it would be unkind to press the issue, and also I was genuinely busy processing what I had just acquired. She had gone to get the promised gym bag and workout clothes while I was away, which were sitting beside her on the booth seat. She pushed them across to me and we confirmed that lessons would happen on Saturdays and Sundays, to avoid the school schedule conflict. We made polite farewell noises at each other. I picked up my things. She watched me leave from the booth with a slightly complicated expression I chose not to analyze too deeply, and I was almost at the door when I realized something was missing from the transaction. I turned back and asked where I paid. She pointed to the finance office without speaking. I walked out 10 minutes later with a gym card in my wallet and a plan forming about the most efficient way to use this particular setup. Back home, my parents were on the sofa with a floor plan of a residential complex spread between them, heads together, discussing the layout. I rested one hand on each of their shoulders and leaned in to look. It was a 3-bedroom apartment in the commercial district, north-south exposure, surrounded by malls, schools, parks and hospitals, a subway stop and bus routes nearby, full supporting facilities, and a price of 7,055 yuan per square meter. I said it looked good to me, and if they thought it was suitable they should book it, and patted both their shoulders. Then I took the gym membership card from my wallet and told my mother the gym at the residential complex entrance had free yoga classes on offer, and that she should go check it out when she had time. She said I was wasting money, but her face was already doing the smile that meant she was very pleased. She loved yoga from television. She had never been willing to spend money on an actual membership. She said I was her good son and told me to go study quickly, and that tomorrow she would buy me hairy crabs as a proper reward. I went back to my room, but first stopped at the kitchen with a purpose. The system mission asked for advanced knowledge that Ganstar did not possess. The system had not specified what kind of knowledge, and working from the principle that the Laodong system never required things that were actually difficult, I looked at my bookshelf for options. My shelves were mostly textbooks, but there were a few extracurricular books. One of them had a distinctly colorful cover. I took it down. It was called 108 Techniques for the House Husband, which my father had bought in an optimistic moment before discovering that he had burned a hole through a pot on his first attempt, broken 2 plates in a bowl, and cut his finger on the 3rd vegetable. He had put the book on my shelf to gather dust. I flipped through the table of contents. 108 dishes including nutritious soups, pregnancy nutrition, meals for recovery from illness, and post-surgery meals, organized across Sichuan, Xiang, Hangzhou, and Lu cuisines, with history and cultural context for each recipe. I read through it at speed. The system confirmed. Task complete. It had 108 dishes across multiple major cuisines. I read it thoroughly enough to satisfy the system's apparent requirements. The chat box updated. Task complete. The health-enhancing pill appeared in my pocket. I went to the kitchen, made 2 bowls of seaweed egg drop soup, split the pill evenly between them, and brought them out to my parents, telling them I had learned to make the soup and asking them to try it. My father examined his bowl with great suspicion, sniffed it, took a measured sip, and then his expression shifted to something approaching respect. My mother had already declared it wonderful. They finished both bowls before I had properly sat down. Neither of them noticed anything unusual about the warmth spreading through their bodies, attributing it to hot soup on a cool evening, and they handed me the bowls and told me to wash them. I stood at the sink running water over the dishes and called out to the system again. It responded with a mission about taking first place in the academy examinations. Reward a sword technique called the vertical sword technique. The name sounded almost aggressively understated compared to something like soul-chasing, life-taking sword. But I asked for details anyway. The system told me it was the secret non-disclosed technique of the hidden Gigu sect. The Gigu sect sounded legitimately impressive, and a non-disclosed secret technique from a hidden sect was exactly the kind of thing that turned out to be catastrophically powerful in every novel I had ever read. The exam was on Monday, and it was Saturday. That was frustrating timing for the main quest. I asked if there was a side quest available, and the system generated one. A background text explaining that Yun Prefecture, which sat on the border between Great Gan and North Liang, was suffering from a great drought, with 3 consecutive years of crop failure and enormous civilian suffering. The population was in dire straits. My first task as the soon-to-be magistrate of Yunzhou was to find a method to resolve the drought. The second task was to protect 100 people of Great Gan. I stared at the mission wording, which asked me to find a method to resolve the situation, and noticed it did not say actually resolve. The system was very specific about finding a method. I had found that specificity useful before. I told the system out loud that artificial rain enhancement through dry ice or silver iodide launched into clouds could achieve artificial precipitation as the primary method. If that was not feasible, one could dig additional wells, hang ironware over water vats, and use the temperature differential between day and night to generate condensation. I listed several more options in quick succession, covering different scenarios. The system accepted this without any apparent difficulty. Both tasks complete. The system was, in every technical sense, exactly as easy to work with as the previous 24 hours had suggested. I asked for another task immediately. The system told me it was updating. I did not take this news calmly. I spent the rest of the night cycling between calling its name, watching the progress indicator refuse to change, and trying unsuccessfully to fall asleep while the night market outside filled the air with shouting and finger-guessing games and sounds of general jubilation at my expense. At 2 in the morning, I was still awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had pushed the system too hard and whether it was about to correct its mistake and identify me as the wrong recipient. When I opened my eyes in the morning, the first thing I saw was the update complete notification floating in the semi-transparent chat field. Before I could fully process this, I pushed off the bed with my usual morning energy, hit the ceiling with a dull impact, said a very strong word, then pushed off the ceiling with my hands, landed back on the bed more or less in control, and said the word again, fully awake. 30 years of true chi was not giving me much warning before making its presence felt in my movements. I lay there for a second and thought about this. In the weeks since the muscle and bone-shaping pill, my body had grown to 185 centimeters and reshuffled itself into something considerably more functional, but the true chi addition was a different order of change. Every small motion now produced more result than intended. I had to recalibrate everything. Walking to the bathroom felt like my feet were slightly ahead of where I had planned them. Turning on the tap required 2 separate micro-adjustments after the initial turn went too far. I understood what novels meant when they described cultivators needing to carefully control their output at all times to avoid alarming ordinary people. The novels always made this sound simple, a matter of intention and practice. And I was discovering that it was both of those things and also an ongoing state of careful monitoring that sat in the background of every physical action, like a second layer of consciousness. I spent the entirety of brushing my teeth learning exactly how much arm pressure produced the correct result. This was going to require attention. I dressed, went to brush my teeth, and immediately called out to the Laodung system, braced for the worst. What I got instead was a gentle monologue addressed to the fictional magistrate, describing his hard work on Blue Star, his study of advanced knowledge, his survival of setbacks to finally reach the first-class realm of martial arts, and his upcoming urgent need to advance to even greater levels before returning to Ganstar. Then a new mission about solving low crop yields in Yunzhou, reward of first-grade fragrance. I stood at the sink with white foam in my mouth and felt a wave of genuine relief. The update had installed nothing meaningful. The system had not grown a brain overnight, had not noticed it was addressing the wrong person, and was still the same cooperative system I had been working with for the past several days. Confirmed. Still a silly dog. Just a slightly updated silly dog. I told it that dry and fermented river sludge mixed with manure spread on the fields would increase soil fertility and production. Task complete. First-grade fragrance appeared in my pocket. It was a pitch-black thing about the size of a Malteser's. No smell at all, despite the name. The item description said consuming it would cause the body to emit an unusual fragrance that made people feel refreshed. So if I ate this, I would become the fragrant concubine. I thought about it briefly and swallowed it whole anyway. There was no stated downside, and I had already eaten 2 mystery pills this week. My parents looked noticeably better at breakfast. My father's hair seemed darker, the wrinkles on my mother's face lighter, both of them radiating a kind of restored energy. I noticed this while eating white porridge with pickled vegetables and fried dough sticks, and made a mental note that when I eventually reached Ganstar, the refining method for the health-enhancing pill would be worth a significant investment of effort. My mother asked my father whether he had noticed that I smelled different. He said he hadn't. She attributed his lack of olfactory sensitivity to smoking and drinking and general failure to bathe with adequate frequency, which he received with an expression of sincere guilt while clearly thinking uncharitable thoughts. I washed the dishes and asked the system for another task. The daily limit on side quests had been implemented by the update, 1 per day. The main quest about the academy examination was unchanged. This was, I reflected, what version 1.0.2 looked like. A tiny patch. The update had accomplished precisely one thing and I had lost sleep worrying about it for nothing. I ate breakfast, watched my mother wipe down the table in her usual morning rhythm, and thought that given the direction things were going, the next update would probably restrict something else useful, and I should make the most of the current setup while it lasted. Then I thought that the most of the current setup I could make was to take first place in the placement exam on Monday, which was entirely achievable and also happened to unlock the vertical sword technique, and that this was a reasonable place to direct my energy. Before the Sunday outing, there was the matter of the side quests that had arrived with the system update's single new feature, which was a daily limit on side quests, 1 per day. I asked the system directly what it had spent all night updating to produce this one restriction, and it informed me that the refresh frequency of side quests had been limited, and that I should prioritize the main quest. So the system had been running all night to install a single timer. I said something about this that I will not repeat here. The main quest remained the academy examination, unchanged. The daily side quest that morning gave me a task about Yunjo's livestock situation, which I answered in 15 seconds, and that was the extent of the day's mission farming. Sunday turned into a family outing nobody had fully disclosed to me in advance. My parents were still buzzing about the floor plan and had apparently arranged in what I could only describe as a conspiracy of fishing enthusiasts for the Jian family to join us in looking at houses at a new residential complex called the Platinum Residential District. Gangi was there with his parents, Jian Yugan and Jin Mai. When I arrived at the meeting point, Gangi waved at me like a dog greeting its owner after a 2-hour separation. Bouncing with so much energy I genuinely thought of a husky. I draped an arm over his shoulder and asked in a low voice why his family was there. He told me his father had heard my father was looking at a house for me, and had decided to buy one too so we could be neighbors and go to internet cafes together more easily. I looked at his smug grin and knew exactly what he was thinking. I mentioned, as casually as I could manage, that the placement exam was tomorrow, and his entire personality deflated in 1 second. Both fathers shook hands with the warmth of men who had been texting each other about fishing locations since the previous evening. The house viewing that morning was efficient to the point of being slightly alarming. Both families arrived, inspected the model unit, confirmed their preferred floors, and paid deposits while I was still figuring out where the cafeteria was. I became fairly certain the only reason they wrapped up so quickly was to get to the fishing spot. Events confirmed this immediately. Straight from the sales center, both families drove to Kanglong Mountain Reservoir, a new construction at the edge of Nanchung that my father had known about since his company's equipment helped build it. He had promised himself he would come fish here once it was done, and here we were. The car stopped a kilometer from the water, and we walked the rest of the way on a dirt path worn in by other fishing enthusiasts, who had apparently been doing the same thing. Gangi and I carried the fishing bags and supplies while both fathers raced each other to the waterfront with the grill. Our mothers walked arm in arm comparing spots for photos and pulling matching pink silk scarves from their pockets simultaneously, which led to a moment of shared delight that I found impossible to explain and did not try. Gangi asked me why women at a certain age all loved posing with scarves. I told him I had no idea, which was the honest answer. The reservoir was wide and still and genuinely beautiful, the water and sky merging at the horizon in exactly the way the textbooks described, but that I had never actually seen in person. Our father set up rods immediately, full of competitive energy. Gangi and I found a spot with a good view, laid down the camping moisture-proof mat, and set up what functioned as our base camp. Looking up from the finished camp, both fathers were already fishing and chatting at the water's edge, laughing about something. Both mothers had positioned themselves slightly away from the men, one posing and one taking photos, then trading roles, and both of them had produced matching pink silk scarves from their pockets. They had not coordinated this. They were apparently just the same person in slightly different packaging. Gangi asked me why women of a certain age all loved taking photos with silk scarves in the wind. I told him I had been asking that question for 2 years and had no useful answer. We were apparently the only 2 people who had been assigned the carrying work and were now surveying the results, while everyone else enjoyed themselves. Gangi took a can of Pepsi, opened it, and suggested we go exploring. He lowered his voice and used the phrase age of exploration with a theatrical quality that suggested he had been saving this idea since we left the house. What he meant, as he explained in a slightly more direct follow-up, was wilderness survival in the Bear Grylls mode. Discovery Channel show, every episode watched, the whole philosophy of finding food and shelter in nature. He had the entrenching tool his father had put in the trunk, and had grabbed it when we unloaded, and now it was a survival tool. I felt genuine enthusiasm for this, which is its own comment on the kinds of entertainment available to 2 17-year-olds on a Sunday afternoon. We set off into the trees behind the reservoir, Gangi in front with the entrenching tool hacking at weeds and bushes, me following with my hands behind my back in a genuinely good mood. The trees here were dense and the ground thick with natural cover, the kind of environment that felt isolated from everything else, even though the reservoir and our parents were only a few hundred meters back. After 200 meters or so, we had already strayed from any defined path. Gangi, in full character as survival expert and wilderness navigator, pointed at a cluster of mushrooms under a tree, caps shaped like bamboo hats, yellowish-brown, stems already gray. He asked if they were edible. I told him those were dog pea moss, also called mica caps, and the stems turning gray meant they could not be eaten. He asked how I knew this. I mentioned a detail from an online video about a person who had cooked a pot of them and then spent the aftermath in the bathroom in a state of distress. Gangi looked at the mushrooms with new respect, crushed them with his boot, and moved on. After another 200 meters or so of not quite following a straight line, Gangi suddenly burst forward with an excited shout and pointed at something half buried under dead branches. A dirty, bulging backpack. Definitely not new, wedged between dead leaves and fallen bark. Clearly there for a long time, clearly not placed there by anyone who planned to come back for it casually. I told him not to rush. He asked what was wrong. I asked him to think about where we were, in the middle of nowhere with no paths and no visible signs of anyone having been here, yet a backpack was bulging with something. He arrived at the obvious conclusion, eyes lighting up even further, suggesting criminals. The possibility I kept to myself was something more forensic, the kind of thing you find in a wilderness scene in true crime reconstructions. I pointed at the dead branches and leaves around the bag and told him to dig, see what was underneath. Gangi dug with the entrenching tool, efficient and thorough, working through the loose material until there was a clear pit around the bag. Nothing was underneath. I used my treasure appraisal technique on the bag itself. The result, not valuable. The technique was accurate about surface value, but had no opinion about contents, which in a case like this was a significant limitation. I put on gloves and crouched down. Gangi crouched beside me, eyes shining. I opened the zipper and found the bag full of dirty shirts. They were heavier than they should have been. Under the shirts was a plastic bag. I took the shirts out and both of us stared at what was underneath. The treasure appraisal technique was still running, and price tags began floating over gold necklaces, gold bracelets, gold rings, gold pendants. All real. The valuations added up quickly. Gangi's mouth was open. I told Gangi we needed to call the police. He processed this for approximately 2 seconds and then asked what to do with the gold in the meantime. I told him to put it back. He looked at it once more, the plastic bag of necklaces and bracelets and rings glinting through the clear plastic, all of it real according to my treasure appraisal technique, and then carefully set it back into the bag. I pulled out what had been wrapped in one of the shirts separately, the thing that made the shirts heavier than cloth. Gangi said a very strong word, with a tone that communicated the situation had just become considerably more serious. He was correct in this assessment. I pulled out my phone and called Chu Ganjun, Chu Gyogyo's second uncle, and a police captain whom I had met recently during the situation with Dagu's gang. He answered with a suspicious tone, asked if I had found another thieves' den, said of course he wanted the merit, and told me to explain. When I mentioned the words involving small bang-bangs, he stood up so fast his dining table shook. I could hear the plates rattling through the phone. Sitting in a separate scene, across the city, Chu Ganjun was having lunch with his wife Gyo Ri and their daughter Chu Gyogyo. He took the call, heard me mention gold robbery and firearms, turned the color of someone who has just remembered an unsolved case, and was at the door putting on his shoes. Before I finished the sentence, he told his wife and daughter to finish eating without him, and left. Gyo-ri looked at the half-empty bowl of noodles her husband had abandoned and said something to Chu Gyogyo about whether the person who called was her little boyfriend. Chu Gyogyo turned the color of a sunset, announced she absolutely was not talking to her mother anymore, and thought about the wicked smile on the face of that bad guy Im No. Back at the reservoir, Gangi's father John Yugan heard a car horn and looked up from his fishing rod to notice that his son had been gone over an hour. My father Im Gyonse was also starting to worry. They maintained composure for the sake of their wives, who were still photographing each other with silk scarves, but inside they were both quietly alarmed. When my father's phone rang and he answered and heard me say something had happened, he dropped his rod and jogged toward the parking area. Jean Yugan almost fell off his stool. Both families hurried to the cars where several police vehicles were already waiting with lights on, and officers were checking license plates. When Chu Ganjun led his team through the trees and called out for me, I called back and brought him directly to the site. He looked at the dugout hole around the bag, the open backpack, the exposed contents, and his expression shifted through several phases. I explained that I had worried it might belong to a victim, which was why I dug around it, and that we had both worn gloves throughout. He and the inspectors behind him looked at me with a gradually changing quality of attention, the kind that involves reassessing a person. Chu Ganjun smiled and told his team to examine the scene. The briefing with our families was handled shortly after, with Chu Ganjun shaking my father's hand warmly and confirming that we had provided vital assistance to an important case involving a gold robbery. He also warned everyone that the perpetrators had not been caught, that the gold had been hidden here, and that nobody should discuss this publicly for our own safety. John Yugan slapped Gangi on the head for looking too smug. Gangi rubbed his head in aggrievement. My father asked Chu Ganjun whether we should all go home. Chu Ganjun said it would be best not to return to the reservoir for a while. My father absorbed this, exchanged a look with Jeon Yugan, and announced that we would find another fishing spot. Both mothers rolled their eyes in unison. The case that Chu Ganjun referenced at the scene was something I felt the weight of once the details came out. The Nanchung robbery from 3 years earlier, 15 kilograms of gold stolen from a jewelry store vault in the middle of the night, 3 security guards killed at the scene, 2 inspectors killed and 3 seriously wounded when the criminals ambushed the responding team from the shadows. The perpetrators had each smoked 2 cigarettes at the scene before leaving, in full awareness that the inspectors were coming. They had been shot during the response but managed to escape. No hospitals reported gunshot wound patients. The gold never appeared in any market. The entire city had been under martial law for a period. Checkpoints on all major routes, patrol cars on every street, and not a trace of the criminals. The case had gone cold and stayed cold for 3 years, until Gangi had been playing wilderness survival in the trees behind a reservoir and noticed a shape under dead branches. I sat with the weight of those numbers for a few minutes while Chu Ganjun's team worked the scene. 5 people dead. 3 security guards who went to work on a normal night and did not come home. 2 inspectors who answered a robbery call and were shot from the shadows by people who had waited for them. The criminals had been patient enough to smoke 2 cigarettes at leisure while knowing a police response was incoming. That was not impulsive violence. That was the planned elimination of witnesses and responding officers. The gold had been buried here for 3 years without anyone touching it, which meant the perpetrators had the discipline to wait out the search period. This was a particular kind of dangerous. I looked at the scene around me, Chu Ganjun's team moving carefully through the trees, and thought about the backpack full of gold lying in a pit, under dead leaves. 3 years. The city had eventually stood down. The checkpoints had come off the roads, the patrol density had dropped back to normal, and the criminals had gone somewhere to wait. And somewhere in the city, or somewhere further away, they were still waiting, possibly still alive, possibly still watching. The gold had been safe in the ground because no one had found it. Now someone had found it, and the people who left it here were going to notice eventually. Chu Ganjun told us that if the rewards processed, he would handle them quietly to protect us from public exposure, since the criminals had not been caught and would likely target anyone they knew had found their hidden goods. The total bounty between the Inspector Bureau and the victimized gold shop would be significant. He said 100,000 yen from the Inspector Bureau alone, with more from the shop side. He was also clearly thinking about the cold case angle, about whether the things in the backpack could finally close something that had been sitting unresolved for 3 years. I asked if this counted as meritorious service. He said of course, and that he would send a commendation letter to our school, which went into our permanent files and counted as bonus points for civil service exams later. I pointed out this seemed modest given the circumstances. He told me I did not know what was good for me. Gangi, hearing the words bonus points, immediately asked whether this applied to the college entrance exam, and the look both Chu Ganjun and I gave him was the look of 2 people watching a very lovable dog ask whether it can vote. I explained to Gangi that if a commendation letter gave college entrance exam points, the exam would simply become a competition of who had more letters. Gangi processed this and made a sheepish face. Chu Ganjun told the criminal hadn't been caught yet, and walking around with this news publicly would put us at risk. Gangi finally genuinely understood, and began looking around nervously as if someone were already in the bushes watching him. My father's response to the situation was to find another fishing spot. When I had expected old comrade Im to suggest packing up and going home, he looked at John Yugon and said they should move to a different location, because he refused to believe he would not catch any fish that day. The dedication of a fishing enthusiast was something I had underestimated. Whatever danger the unapprehended criminal represented, it could not compete with the claim that a reservoir was holding fish somewhere. Both families drove elsewhere. The fathers eventually found a smaller pond, and the day ended with my father and John Yugon buying fish from a market stall on the way home after catching nothing at the pond, with the satisfied expressions of people who had been outdoors and had technically been near fish. Monday morning came with the rooster alarm clock and my hand finding it on instinct. I lay there for approximately 2.5 minutes before my consciousness assembled itself fully, and then I remembered what day it was, sat up abruptly, and got dressed in about 40 seconds. Today was the senior year placement exam. I brushed my teeth, put on my uniform, found a 20-yen note from my mother on the shoe cabinet, with a note about not buying spicy strips and wishing me luck on the exam. I wrote back that she should not forget my hairy crabs, and went out. At the school gate, the breakfast aunties were doing strong business. I ordered a deluxe egg-stuffed pancake with extra green onions, cilantro and chili, made exact change myself. Then I heard Chu Gyo-gyo's voice behind me, that slightly playful crisp tone I had started recognizing without needing to look. She was tilting her head at me with a smile, backpack straps gripped in both hands, heavy enough that I frowned at it. I reached out and took the backpack off her before she had fully processed what was happening. She told me it wasn't heavy and grabbed it back, lifting it to demonstrate. We stood there both holding the backpack looking at each other over it, and then Gangi's voice erupted from the stall next door, asking what deluxe Fujiamo came with. And the moment broke. The 3 of us walked to school eating breakfast. Chu Gyo-gyo had a mission from her second uncle, the heavy bag full of books. Criminal law, civil law, basic knowledge of public security management, criminal psychology, inspector jurisprudence, inspector skills. Chu Ganjun was not a subtle man. Gangi saw the books and laughed like a duck.